The briefcase hit the polished terminal floor with a crack that echoed like a gunshot. Morgan Hayes froze mid-step, her boarding pass trembling in her hand as the man crumpled, knees buckling, lips draining to a terrifying shade of blue. Around her, 300 travelers pulled out phones instead of helping. The gate agent's voice sliced through the chaos. Final boarding call for Flight 447 to Denver, doors closing in 2 minutes. Denver meant her interview, her escape from Riverside General, her chance to stop being invisible. The man's chest stuttered once, then went still. Morgan's medical bag hit the floor beside him. If you want to see how this story unfolds, how one impossible choice changed everything, stay with me until the very end. Like this video and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from so I can see how far this story travels. Morgan Hayes had been counting down to this moment for 6 months, 3 weeks, and 4 days. Not the moment where she'd be kneeling on airport linoleum doing chest compressions on a stranger. The other moment, the one that was supposed to happen in exactly 97 minutes when she walked into the administration building at Summit Ridge Medical Center in Denver and interviewed for the clinical director position that would finally prove she was more than what Riverside General had decided she was worth. The Cleveland Hopkins terminal smelled like burnt coffee and recycled air. Her carry-on was packed with the Navy suit she'd spent 2 paychecks on, the portfolio of patient outcome improvements she'd compiled on her own time, and the resignation letter she'd already written in her head 1,000 times. She'd requested the day off 3 months ago, been denied. Requested again, denied. Filed formal PTO. Denied with a post-it note that read, staffing crisis, essential personnel. So she'd called in sick for the first time in 7 years. She knew what they thought of her at Riverside. Just a floor nurse. That's what Dr. Benjamin Carver had said last month when she'd presented her sepsis protocol revision to the board. He'd actually laughed, this practiced dismissive sound that made the other administrators smile into their coffee cups. We appreciate your enthusiasm, Morgan, but protocol design is really outside your scope. Why don't you focus on what you do best? What she did best, apparently, was working doubles when the emergency department was understaffed, covering for nurses who'd quit without notice because the conditions were intolerable, watching patients decline because there weren't enough hands or hours or basic supplies to give them the care they deserved. The departure board flickered. Gate B17, boarding. Her gate was B22, but she was early, pathologically early, the way people who grew up uncertain about everything tend to be about flights. She had time to grab something that wasn't cafeteria food, maybe even sit for 20 minutes without anyone demanding something from her. Then the man in the gray suit stumbled. It wasn't dramatic at first, just a businessman walking too fast, pulling one of those expensive hard-shell briefcases that probably cost more than her monthly rent. He veered slightly left, overcorrected right. His free hand went to his chest, palm flat, fingers spread, the universal gesture of something's wrong. Morgan's training kicked in before her brain fully processed what she was seeing. She cataloged details automatically. Male, approximately 65 years old, well-dressed, slight pallor, gait unsteady. Possible cardiac event. Possible stroke. Possible... The briefcase clattered away from him like it had been yanked by an invisible cord. His knees hit the floor with a sound that made people nearby wince and step back. Not toward him. Back. "Oh my God," someone said. A phone appeared, then another, then a dozen. Cameras pointing, recording, not helping. Morgan was already moving. She covered the 20 feet between them in seconds, her medical bag swinging hard against her hip. "Sir? Sir, can you hear me?" She dropped beside him, one hand on his shoulder, the other reaching for his carotid pulse. His skin was cold, clammy. His lips were losing color fast, going from pink to pale to a blue that made her stomach drop. "Someone call 911!" She didn't shout, didn't need to. Her voice carried that particular tone of absolute authority that came from years of triaging chaos. "Now!" A woman in yoga pants backed away. A teenager kept filming. An older man pulled out his phone, stared at it like he'd forgotten how it worked, then slowly started dialing. Too slow. Everything was too slow. The man's eyes rolled back. His breathing went from labored to gasping to something worse, that terrible shallow pattern that meant his body was shutting down. "Sir, I'm a nurse. I'm going to help you." Morgan tilted his head back, checked his airway. Clear, Checked his pulse again. Thready. Fading. Stay with me. Somewhere above her, a gate agent's voice. Final boarding call for Flight 447 to Denver. All remaining passengers, please proceed to Gate B22 immediately. Her flight, her interview, her entire future. The man's chest rose once, fell, and stopped. Morgan ripped open her medical bag. The AED she'd bought with her own money after Riverside's administration had misplaced the budget request for updated emergency equipment was underneath her stethoscope and spare scrubs. She yanked it out, tore open the packaging, powered it on. Everyone back! She pulled open the man's shirt, buttons scattering, expensive fabric tearing. Didn't matter. Nothing mattered except the next 60 seconds. She slapped the pads onto his bare chest, positioned them exactly right. The AED started its analysis. Analyzing rhythm. Do not touch patient. Morgan's hands hovered. She could feel people watching, could hear whispers, murmurs, that ugly curiosity that made emergencies into entertainment, could hear the gate agent announcing something else, something about final boarding, doors closing, last call. Shock advised. Clear. She hit the button. The man's body convulsed. The AED started counting down the time until the next shock. She started compressions immediately. 30 compressions. 2 breaths. The ratios were burned into her muscle memory from thousands of drills, dozens of real codes. That one terrible night when she'd done CPR for 47 minutes on a teenager who'd wrapped his car around a telephone pole and survived because she refused to stop. Ma'am? A security guard appeared at the edge of her vision, young, uncertain. Ma'am, you can't... I'm a registered nurse and this man is in cardiac arrest. Morgan didn't break rhythm, didn't look up. Either help me or get out of my way. The guard stepped back. 30 compressions. She counted silently, keeping the pace exact. The man's sternum compressed under her palms. His chest rose and fell with the breath she forced into his lungs. Nothing. No response. The AED beeped, analyzing rhythm. Over the terminal PA system. This is the final boarding call for passenger Morgan Hayes on Flight 447 to Denver. Please proceed to Gate B22 immediately. The aircraft doors are closing. They were calling her by name now. Her seat was probably the last one empty. They were going to close the doors. They were going to leave without her. Morgan pressed harder, faster. The compressions were perfect, exactly 2 inches deep, exactly 100 per minute. Her arms burned. Sweat dripped down her spine despite the terminal air conditioning. Shock advised. Clear! Another shock. Another convulsion. She went right back to compressions. A paramedic kit appeared beside her. Someone from Airport Medical had finally shown up. A woman in a crisp uniform knelt across from Morgan. I've got the bag. Keep going. Morgan kept going. 30 compressions. The other woman squeezed the bag mask, forcing oxygen into lungs that weren't breathing on their own. 30 more. Another squeeze. They fell into rhythm without speaking, that wordless synchronization that happened between medical professionals who knew what they were doing. How long has he been down? The woman asked. 3 minutes? Maybe 4? Morgan's voice was steady, even though her arms were screaming. 2 shocks delivered. No response yet. Ambulance is 6 minutes out. 6 minutes. The man might not have 6 minutes. Morgan compressed harder. The crowd had grown. Airport security was trying to push people back, create space, but phones were still recording. She could see herself in the reflection of a nearby window, hair falling out of its ponytail, shirt untucked, kneeling on a terminal floor, destroying her good travel pants while her plane boarded without her. Analyzing rhythm. Please. The word echoed in her head like a prayer, even though she'd stopped praying years ago. Please let this work. Please let him live. Please don't let this be for nothing. Shock advised. Clear. 3rd shock. The man's back arched. His eyes fluttered, just for a second, just barely, but Morgan saw it. Come on, she whispered. Come on, don't you quit on me. She started compressions again. 15 seconds in, his chest jerked. Not from her compressions, a real movement. Spontaneous. Wait. The airport medic held up her hand. Wait, I've got a pulse. Morgan froze, pressed two fingers against the man's carotid artery. Found it. Weak, fast. But there. Pulse confirmed. Her voice cracked, just slightly, just enough to betray the adrenaline crash that was starting to hit. Respiration shallow, but present. The man's eyes opened, unfocused at first, pupils blown, but they tracked slowly until they found Morgan's face. His lips moved. No sound came out. He tried again. "Don't talk," Morgan said. "You had a cardiac event. Ambulance is coming. You're going to be okay." He grabbed her wrist. His grip was weak but insistent. She leaned closer. "Thank..." The word came out as barely more than breath. "Thank you." Then his eyes closed again, but his pulse stayed steady. His chest rose and fell. He was breathing. Morgan sat back on her heels. Her hands were shaking now that the crisis was passing. The airport medic was already getting vitals, preparing for the ambulance handoff. Security was clearing space. Everything was moving forward without her input. She looked up at the departure board. Flight 447 to Denver. Departed. The gate was closed. The plane was gone. Her interview was in 93 minutes, and she was in Cleveland with no way to get there in time. Her phone was already buzzing in her pocket, probably the airline app sending her a notification about her missed flight, probably Summit Ridge's HR department wondering where she was, probably her daughter asking if she'd landed yet. "You saved his life." Morgan turned. An older woman was standing a few feet away, hands pressed to her chest like she was trying to hold her heart in place. "I watched the whole thing. You saved that man's life." Other people were nodding. A few clapped. Someone said something about hero. The word felt wrong, too big, too dramatic for what she'd just done. She hadn't been heroic. She'd been a nurse. There was a patient. She'd done her job. Except it hadn't been her job. She was off duty, off the clock, supposed to be on a plane. The paramedics arrived in a controlled rush. Morgan gave them report, patient details, interventions performed, current status. They loaded the man onto a gurney, professional and efficient. One of them, a woman probably 10 years younger than Morgan, paused. "You did good work," she said. "Real good. Most people just stand there. Most people aren't nurses. Most nurses aren't you." The gurney rolled away. The crowd dispersed. Security started cleaning up, bagging the torn AED packaging, the scattered contents of Morgan's medical bag, the man's briefcase that had skidded halfway across the terminal. Morgan's phone wouldn't stop buzzing. She pulled it out. 7 missed calls, 12 texts, 3 voicemails. She opened the most recent text first. "Emma, daughter. Did you land? How's Denver? Good luck with the interview. You're going to crush it, and they're going to love you, and we're going to celebrate when you get home." Morgan's throat tightened. Emma was 15, brilliant, already talking about pre-med programs and college scholarships that Morgan couldn't afford. This interview, this job, would have meant a 40% salary increase. Better benefits. Enough money to actually help with tuition instead of just hoping Emma's grades would be enough. The next text was from Summit Ridge's HR coordinator. Rachel Chen. "Hi, Morgan. Just confirming your 2:30 p.m. interview with our hiring committee. Please check in at the main reception desk when you arrive. Looking forward to meeting you." Morgan checked the time. 12:47 p.m. Even if she could get on the next flight, even if there was a next flight with available seats, she'd never make it. She typed out a response, deleted it, typed another, deleted that too. What was she supposed to say? "Sorry, I missed my flight because I was too busy keeping someone alive"? It sounded like an excuse, a lie. The kind of thing people said when they weren't actually serious about a job. A security supervisor approached. Older guy, kind face, the sort of calm that came from seeing everything airports had to offer. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to come with me." Morgan's stomach dropped. "Am I in trouble?" No. He held up both hands. "Nothing like that. The patient's asking for you." "The what?" "The gentleman you helped. He's conscious, alert. He's asking to speak with you before they transport him to the hospital." The supervisor gestured toward a hallway marked "Authorized personnel only." "This way, please." Morgan grabbed her bag, her destroyed carry-on, and followed. They walked past gates and shops and restaurants, took 2 turns into progressively quieter corridors, and ended up in what looked like a private medical suite. Airport clinic, she realized. The kind of place they took passengers who needed immediate attention but weren't quite sick enough for an ambulance. The man from the terminal was sitting on an examination table, oxygen cannula in his nose, cardiac monitor beeping steadily beside him. He looked better, color returning, eyes focused. But what made Morgan stop in the doorway wasn't his condition. It was the 2 men standing on either side of him. They weren't doctors, weren't paramedics. They wore dark suits that fit too well, stood with military posture, and had the kind of watchful stillness that screamed federal agent or private security or something else equally serious. The man saw her and tried to sit up straighter. One of the suited men put a hand on his shoulder, gentle but firm. "Easy, sir." "You're the nurse." The man's voice was stronger now, rough but clear. "The one who—" "Morgan Hayes." She stayed in the doorway. Something about this felt wrong. Not dangerous wrong, but definitely not normal wrong. "You should rest," the paramedic said. "I know what the paramedic said. I also know you missed your flight to save my life." He gestured to the suited men. "They told me. Track down your boarding pass, your flight information. You were supposed to be in Denver right now." Morgan's pulse kicked up. "How do you—" "My name is Adrian Locke." He said it like it should mean something. When Morgan just stared blankly, he added, "General Adrian Locke, United States Army Medical Command." The world tilted slightly. A general. She'd done CPR on a general. The men in suits made sense now. Military protection detail, probably. The whole situation made sense except for the part where none of it made any sense at all. "I don't understand," Morgan said. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you deserve to know who you saved." Locke's expression was difficult to read, gratitude mixed with something sharper, more calculating. "And because my briefcase wasn't full of business papers." One of the suited men retrieved the hard-shell case from beside the examination table, set it on the counter, opened it. Inside were files, dozens of them, labeled folders, official documents, pages marked with red confidential stamps. Morgan saw hospital names, financial records, investigation reports. She saw Riverside General Hospital's logo. "I'm here investigating medical fraud," Locke said. "Contract violations, misappropriation of federal funding. Your hospital has been under review for 8 months. We have evidence that senior administration diverted emergency preparedness grants, staffing budgets, and equipment funds into executive compensation. People are working double shifts because the money meant to hire adequate staff is paying for someone's vacation home." Morgan's mouth went dry. "Patients are dying," Locke continued, "because equipment isn't being maintained and supplies aren't being ordered. The CDC flagged Riverside 6 months ago for infection control violations. OSHA has 3 open complaints. The nursing union has filed 17 formal grievances in the last year alone. Your hospital is failing, and the people responsible are getting rich while it happens." "Why are you telling me this?" Morgan's voice came out smaller than she intended. Locke looked at her for a long moment. "Because I read your file." "My what file?" "The one my team compiled on every nurse and physician at Riverside. You're in there. Morgan Hayes, 7 years at Riverside General, perfect attendance until today. 0 disciplinary actions, 3 patient safety commendations, 2 quality improvement initiatives submitted to administration, both rejected. Multiple overtime violations on your record because you won't leave a shift until coverage arrives." He paused. "And a pending interview at Summit Ridge Medical Center in Denver for a position you're about to lose because you were too busy saving my life to get on a plane." Morgan couldn't breathe. "You're the kind of nurse that hospitals should be building around," Locke said. "Instead, they treat you like a disposable resource. I want to know why you stayed." Morgan had never actually articulated the answer. "I stayed because patients need someone. Because walking away feels like abandoning them. Because I kept thinking it would get better." "Did it?" "No." Locke nodded like she'd confirmed something he already knew. "Here's what's going to happen. I'm going to the hospital. This cardiac event was, according to my cardiologist, A warning sign I've been ignoring for months. Stress, overwork, ironic given what I'm investigating. A ghost of a smile. They're transporting me to Riverside because it's the closest facility with a cardiac unit. I'll be admitted, under observation, which means I'll be inside your hospital during evening shift change. I'll see firsthand what I've only read about in reports. Sir, with respect, I don't see what that has to do with... You're going to be there too. Morgan blinked. I called in sick. I can't just... You can. Locke's expression sharpened. Because I'm requesting you specifically as my nurse. Military patients have the right to request continuity of care with personnel who've provided emergency treatment. I'm invoking that right. Riverside administration will be informed that a federal military patient requires Nurse Morgan Hayes for the duration of his care. They won't refuse. That's not how... That's exactly how it works when the patient is conducting a federal investigation and has 2 JAG lawyers on speed dial. Locke leaned forward slightly. I need someone inside that hospital who isn't afraid to tell me the truth. Someone who gives a damn about patients more than politics. You saved my life today. Now I'm asking you to help me save others. Morgan's mind raced. This was insane. She'd just destroyed her chance at Denver. She was standing in an airport medical clinic being recruited into some kind of federal investigation by a general she'd resuscitated 40 minutes ago. Nothing about this was normal. But he was right. Everything he'd said about Riverside was true. She'd watched it happen, lived it, bled for it. What happens to the people who are responsible, she asked, if the evidence supports it? Criminal charges, fraud, embezzlement, negligent endangerment, real consequences. Locke's voice was steel. But I need proof. I need witness testimony. I need someone who knows where the bodies are buried, metaphorically speaking, and isn't afraid to point. They'll fire me. They'll try, but you'll be protected. Federal whistleblower status. Legal counsel. Documentation. He paused. And when this is over, you'll have your choice of positions. Any military hospital in the country would fight to have you, including the ones in Denver. Morgan thought about Emma, about the resignation letter she'd already written mentally, about Dr. Carver's dismissive laugh and 7 years of being treated like she didn't matter. She thought about the man on the terminal floor, how easily everyone had stepped back, started filming, watched him die. She thought about what would happen if nobody ever said enough. Okay, Morgan heard herself say, I'll do it. Locke's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes shifted. Approval, maybe, or relief. Your flight to Denver. Did you buy the expensive ticket or the cheap one? The cheap one. Why? My people will get you rebooked, first class, tomorrow morning. We'll have someone from Summit Ridge's board contact their HR department tonight. Personal recommendation from a general carries weight. You'll have your interview. I don't understand. If I'm helping you, Makum, you are helping me. But missing that interview would be collateral damage from saving my life. I don't accept collateral damage. Locke gestured to one of his detail. Get her to the hospital. Make sure administration knows she's coming. Make sure they know why. The suited man nodded. Yes, sir. Morgan felt like she'd been caught in a riptide, pulled under, spun around, deposited somewhere completely different from where she'd started. An hour ago, she'd been a nurse trying to escape a failing hospital. Now she was, what? A federal witness? An informant? A woman who'd made a choice and couldn't take it back. The ambulance ride to Riverside General took 14 minutes. Morgan sat in the back with Locke, monitoring his vitals, while his protection detail followed in a black SUV that screamed government vehicle. The paramedics were professional, quiet, probably wondering why a military general was being treated by an off-duty nurse he'd just met. Morgan wondered the same thing. You're thinking too loud, Locke said. His eyes were closed, but he was clearly conscious. The monitor showed normal sinus rhythm, fast but stable. I'm thinking about what happens when we get there. What do you think happens? I think Dr. Carver's going to have questions, a lot of them. And I think administration is going to be very interested in why a federal patient specifically requested me. Morgan checked the IV line. I think this is going to get complicated very fast. Good, Locke said. Complicated means people make mistakes. Mistakes mean evidence. They pulled into Riverside's emergency bay. Morgan had walked through these doors 1,000 times, usually exhausted, usually behind schedule, usually bracing herself for whatever crisis was waiting. Now she was arriving in an ambulance with a general whose investigation could destroy the hospital's entire leadership structure. The doors opened. The usual chaos of an emergency department spilled out. Nurses moving between patients, doctors shouting orders, monitors beeping, families waiting. And standing directly in front of the ambulance, arms crossed, expression thunderous, was Dr. Benjamin Carver. He saw Morgan, and his face did something complicated. "Nurse Hayes," his voice could have frozen water. "Would you like to explain why you're arriving at this hospital in an ambulance after calling in sick this morning?" Morgan opened her mouth. Nothing came out. Locke sat up smoothly, yanked the oxygen cannula from his nose, and fixed Carver with a look that probably made colonels wet themselves. "She's here because I requested her. I'm General Adrian Locke, U.S. Army Medical Command. I experienced a cardiac event at Hopkins Airport. Nurse Hayes performed emergency CPR and defibrillation, saving my life. As a military patient receiving care at a civilian facility, I'm invoking my right to continuity of care. Nurse Hayes will be my primary nurse for the duration of my admission." Carver's expression went from angry to confused to carefully neutral. "General Locke, of course, we're honored to have you, but perhaps one of our more experienced—" "I didn't ask for experienced. I asked for Nurse Hayes." The silence stretched. Morgan could see the calculation happening behind Carver's eyes. Refuse and insult a military general. Accept and give Morgan, the nurse he'd spent years dismissing, sudden authority. "Of course," Carver said finally. "Nurse Hayes, you're assigned to General Locke's care. I trust you'll give him our hospital's absolute best attention." Morgan met his eyes, saw the warning there, the reminder of her place. "Absolutely," she said. "He'll get exactly what he deserves." Locke was admitted to the cardiac unit on the 4th floor, private room. Telemetry monitoring, a cardiologist Morgan respected, Dr. Yolanda Martinez, one of the few physicians at Riverside who actually listened to nurses, came to evaluate him. They ran tests, drew labs, set up continuous monitoring, and through it all, Locke watched, noticed, cataloged. Morgan saw him clock the outdated telemetry system, the cardiac monitor that glitched every few minutes because the hospital had delayed replacement for 3 years. The crash cart at the end of the hall that was missing 2 essential medications because pharmacy had been backordered for weeks. Evening shift change approached. Morgan should have been off duty, should have been in Denver. Instead, she was at Locke's bedside adjusting his IV when her phone buzzed. Emma. Video call. "I need to take this," Morgan said. "1 minute." She stepped into the hall, connected the call. Emma's face filled the screen, so like Morgan's at that age, it was sometimes startling. Dark hair, sharp eyes, smile that could light up rooms. "Mom, did you land? How was the flight? Tell me everything about Denver." Morgan's chest tightened. "Honey, I didn't make it to Denver." Emma's smile faltered. "What? Why not? Did the flight get canceled?" "No, How did you explain this?" "There was an emergency at the airport. A man had a heart attack. I had to help him." "Oh my God, is he okay?" "He is now, but I missed my flight. I missed the interview." Emma's face fell completely. "Mom, no. That was your big chance. You've been planning this for months." "I know. Can you reschedule? They're working on it. It's going to be fine." The lie tasted awful. "Listen, I have to go. I just wanted to let you know I'm home. Well, I'm at work, but I'm okay." "You're at Riverside? I thought you called in sick." "It's complicated. I'll explain later. I love you." "Love you too." Emma paused. "Mom, you did the right thing, saving that guy. I know the interview was important, but you did the right thing." Morgan ended the call before the tears could start. When she returned to Locke's room, she found him sitting up in bed, reading something on a tablet one of his detail had brought. He looked up when she entered. "Your daughter?" "Yes." "Tell her the interview is still happening. Tomorrow at 2 p.m. Summit Ridge has been notified. They're expecting you." Morgan stopped. "How did you—" "I told you. I don't accept collateral damage." Locke set down the tablet. "Now, tell me about this hospital. Start with the things that scare you most. So Morgan did. She told him about the staffing ratios that violated every safety guideline, about nurses working 16-hour shifts because there wasn't coverage, about the time the entire ICU was down to one ventilator because maintenance had been deferred and nobody had bothered to replace the broken equipment until a patient died. She told him about the infection control violations, the supply shortages, the medication errors that happened because pharmacy was understaffed and overworked, the patient complaints that vanished into administration and were never addressed. She told him about Dr. Carver's dismissive attitude toward nurses, about the vice president of operations who'd authorized a $100,000 renovation to the executive suite while the emergency department ceiling was literally leaking. And Locke listened, took notes, asked specific questions that told Morgan he already knew most of this. He was just confirming, documenting, building a case. They were 40 minutes into the conversation when Dr. Carver appeared in the doorway. Nurse Hayes. His voice was pleasant, his expression was not. A word. In private. Morgan glanced at Locke. He gave the slightest nod. She followed Carver into the hall. He waited until they were out of earshot, then turned on her with the full force of 7 years of accumulated disdain. What the hell do you think you're doing? Providing patient care, as requested. Don't play games with me, Morgan. You called in sick. You were supposed to be in Denver. Now you're back here, attached to a military patient, acting like you have some kind of authority. He stepped closer. I don't know what you think you're accomplishing, but Dr. Carver. Locke's voice cut across the distance between his room and where they stood. Is there a problem with my care? Carver's jaw tightened. No, sir. No problem at all. Good. Because Nurse Hayes and I were in the middle of discussing my treatment plan. I'd appreciate it if you didn't interrupt. It wasn't a request. Carver looked at Morgan. She saw it in his eyes, the awareness that something had shifted, that the floor nurse he'd spent years dismissing suddenly had backing he couldn't ignore. Of course, he said. My apologies. He walked away. Morgan returned to Locke's room. He's going to retaliate, she said quietly. Let him try. Locke's smile was sharp. Every move he makes from this point forward is evidence. Every conversation, every decision. My team is documenting everything. The next 3 hours were a masterclass in investigation disguised as patient care. Locke asked for supplies, basic things, the kind of routine requests any patient might make. Morgan fulfilled them and noted when things were missing. Outdated, substandard. She documented medication delays, equipment malfunctions. The moment when a code blue was called 2 floors down and only one crash cart responded because the other was still broken. At 11 p.m., Locke's detail quietly delivered a folder to Morgan. Inside was a complete dossier on Riverside General's financial records for the past 3 years. Grant money received and misallocated. Federal contracts signed and violated. A list of executives whose salaries had increased 40% while nursing staff had been denied cost of living raises. Dr. Carver was on the list. So was the CEO, the VP of operations, the entire upper tier of administration. Read it, Locke said. Know what you're dealing with. Morgan read. With every page, her anger crystallized into something colder, more focused. They'd known. All of them. They'd known the hospital was failing, known patients were being endangered, known nurses were being crushed under impossible conditions, and they'd actively chosen profit over lives. At midnight, Morgan's shift officially ended. She should have gone home, should have slept before her rescheduled flight tomorrow. Instead, she stayed. At 2 a.m., a patient down the hall coded. Morgan responded automatically, muscle memory taking over. Grabbed the crash cart, the one functional crash cart. Started compressions. Called for help that took too long to arrive because night shift was running with half the nurses they needed. The patient didn't make it. Morgan stood outside the room afterward, scrubs stained, hands shaking with exhaustion and fury. A family would be notified, a death certificate would be filed, and tomorrow administration would mark it as an unfortunate outcome. Unavoidable. Except it wasn't. Locke's detail found her in the stairwell at 3 a.m., sitting on the steps, staring at nothing. General wants to see you. She followed them back. Locke was awake, monitors beeping steadily, looking far too alert for someone who'd nearly died 12 hours ago. "You witnessed a patient death tonight," he said. It wasn't a question. "Yes." "Tell me what happened." Morgan told him. Every detail. The delayed response, the malfunctioning equipment, the understaffing that meant no one had been monitoring closely enough to catch the decline earlier. Locke's expression didn't change, but something behind his eyes turned to ice. "That's evidence," he said. "Document everything, every detail, everything you told me. Put it in writing. My JAG will need it." "When does this end?" Morgan's voice cracked. "When do people actually face consequences?" "Soon." Locke met her eyes. "Sunrise, Morgan. By sunrise, everything changes." She didn't understand what he meant, not until she went home at 5 a.m. to shower and change for her flight, not until she checked her phone and saw the news alert. Federal investigators raid Riverside General Hospital. Multiple executives detained for questioning, allegations of fraud and criminal negligence. Morgan stood in her bathroom, phone shaking in her hand, reading the article that was already going viral. The raid had started at 4 a.m. FBI. Military investigators. Federal agents with warrants and boxes and authority that couldn't be dismissed or ignored. They'd seized financial records, detained Dr. Carver, escorted the CEO out in handcuffs. By 6 a.m., the hospital's parking lot was full of news vans. By 7 a.m., Morgan's phone was ringing off the hook. Colleagues, friends, reporters who'd somehow gotten her number. She turned it off, got dressed, packed for Denver. At the airport, Locke's detail was waiting. They escorted her through security, bypassed every line, delivered her directly to the first-class gate. A suited woman handed her an updated boarding pass and a sealed envelope. "General Locke wanted you to have this." Inside was a handwritten note. "You saved my life yesterday. Today, we're saving your hospital the right way. The interview is at 2 p.m. They're expecting you. Show them what real nursing looks like. A.L." Underneath was a business card, direct line to a JAG attorney, a letter of recommendation on official Army letterhead, and a check for $15,000 with a memo line that read, "Education Fund. For Emma." Morgan boarded the plane with tears streaming down her face. She landed in Denver at 1 p.m., made her interview at 2:04, walked into Summit Ridge's administration building wearing the Navy suit and carrying 7 years of experience that finally meant something. The interview lasted 2 hours. They asked about her protocols, her patient outcomes, her leadership style. They offered her the job before she left the building. Morgan flew home that night, returned to Cleveland. To Emma, who tackled her with a hug that felt like absolution. To a city where Riverside General Hospital was all over the news. Executives arrested, board members resigning, federal oversight imposed. And to a future that looked nothing like the one she'd planned when she'd packed her bag yesterday morning. But the text message from Locke arrived at 11 p.m., just as she was falling asleep. Phase 1 complete. Phase 2 starts Monday. "You in?" Morgan stared at her phone for a long moment. Then she typed back a single word. "Yes." The real work, she realized, was just beginning. Monday morning arrived with the kind of cold that made Cleveland feel like it was punishing people for existing. Morgan stood outside Riverside General at 6:45 a.m., watching news vans pack up their equipment after camping out all weekend. The hospital looked the same brick facade, same flickering light above the emergency entrance that maintenance had been meaning to fix for 8 months. But everything underneath had shifted. She badged in through the employee entrance. The usual morning chaos was absent. Instead, there was something else. A tense, humming silence punctuated by whispered conversations that stopped the moment she walked past. Nurses she'd worked with for years looked at her like she'd grown a second head. Some nodded, others looked away. The break room was worse. Morgan poured coffee into a chipped mug that had been in this cabinet since before she started. Behind her, 3 nurses from the surgical floor went quiet. She could feel their stares drilling into her back. "Is it true?" The question came from Lisa Chen, a newer nurse Morgan had mentored last year. "Did you really? The news said federal investigators and Dr. Carver got arrested. and someone said you were there when it happened. Morgan turned. Lisa's face was a mix of awe and fear. The two other nurses, Janet and Marcus, looked equally unsettled. I was there, Morgan said carefully. But I wasn't part of the investigation. I just took care of a patient. A patient who happened to be a general conducting a federal raid. Marcus's tone was neutral, but his eyes weren't. That's one hell of a coincidence, Morgan. It wasn't planned. Doesn't matter if it was planned. Janet crossed her arms. Half the administration is gone. Dr. Carver's being charged with fraud. The CEO's facing criminal negligence. People are scared. We don't know what's coming next. Morgan wanted to tell them what was coming next would be better. That the hospital might actually function the way it was supposed to. That nurses might stop collapsing from exhaustion and patients might stop dying from preventable complications. But she just said, I need to get to my shift. The cardiac unit was different too. No sign of Locke. He'd been transferred to a military hospital in Virginia on Saturday, stable, and recovering under proper supervision. But his room was still marked as occupied. Federal oversight, the sign said. Authorized personnel only. Morgan's assignment sheet was waiting at the nurses' station. 4 patients. Standard load for a unit that should have had twice the staffing. But today there was a 5th name added at the bottom in red ink. Special assignment? Federal compliance observation. Report to conference room 4B at 0800. The conference room was on the administrative floor. Morgan had been up there exactly twice in 7 years, both times to receive Employee of the Month recognition that came with a certificate and no actual raise. She took the stairs instead of the elevator, buying herself time to think. The door to 4B was closed. She knocked. Come in. The voice wasn't familiar. Morgan opened the door and found herself facing 3 people she'd never seen before. A woman in a sharp gray suit sat at the head of the table. 2 men flanked her, one in military dress uniform, one in business casual that screamed federal agent. Nurse Hayes, the woman gestured to an empty chair. I'm Director Catherine Reeves, Department of Health and Human Services, Office of Inspector General. This is Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Webb and Special Agent David Ortiz, FBI. Please sit. Morgan sat. Her pulse was doing interesting things. You're not in trouble, Reeves said immediately. Let me establish that first. You're here because General Locke recommended you as a primary source for our compliance review. Everything discussed in this room is protected under federal whistleblower statutes. Do you understand? I think so. We need you to walk us through this hospital's operations. Agent Ortiz slid a tablet across the table. Specifically, we need documentation of the discrepancies between what Riverside reports to federal oversight agencies and what actually happens on the ground. Staffing numbers, equipment functionality, supply chain, patient outcomes. Morgan looked at the tablet. The screen showed a spreadsheet, rows and rows of data that looked official and complete. What am I looking at? Riverside's self-reported compliance metrics for the past 18 months, Lieutenant Colonel Webb said. According to these numbers, this hospital meets or exceeds every federal standard for patient safety, staffing ratios, and equipment maintenance. Morgan almost laughed. Would've, if the situation weren't so grim. That's not even remotely true. We know, Reeves leaned forward, which is why we need you to show us the real numbers. For the next 2 hours, Morgan walked them through everything. She pulled up actual staffing logs, not the doctored versions administration submitted, but the real schedules that showed nurses working double shifts and mandatory overtime. She documented equipment failures that had been marked as resolved in official reports but never actually fixed. She showed them supply requisitions that were approved on paper but never fulfilled. She told them about the patient who died early Saturday morning, about the malfunctioning crash cart, about the delayed response time because the unit was running with half the required staff. Agent Ortiz took notes. Lieutenant Colonel Webb cross-referenced everything against official documents. Director Reeves just listened, her expression growing darker with each revelation. How long has this been happening? Reeves asked finally. Years. At least since I started, probably longer. And nobody reported it? Morgan's laugh was bitter. People tried. Nurses filed complaints with the union filed grievances with administration. Administration said they'd look into it, and then nothing changed. We reported equipment failures through proper channels. Maintenance said they'd handle it. They didn't. Patients and families complained about care quality. Those complaints disappeared into some database and we never heard about them again. What about external oversight? Webb asked. State inspections? Joint Commission reviews? Those were theater. Morgan pulled up another file on the tablet, a memo she'd found buried in shared drives months ago. Administration would get advance notice of inspections. They'd do emergency equipment repairs, bring in temporary staff, make sure everything looked perfect for the 2 days inspectors were here. Then as soon as they left, everything went back to normal. Reeves read the memo, her jaw tightening. This is conspiracy to defraud federal healthcare programs. This is criminal. I know. Do you have more documentation like this? Morgan thought about the folders she'd been compiling for 3 years. Started originally as evidence for a potential lawsuit she never had the courage to file, continued as a chronicle of her own growing desperation. Yes. We'll need copies of everything. Can you get them to us by end of day? I can get them to you in an hour. She excused herself, went down to the parking lot, retrieved the thumb drive from her car's glove compartment, returned to the conference room and plugged it into the laptop they provided. The 3 investigators went silent as they scrolled through Morgan's files. Patient incident reports that never made it to official databases. Photos of broken equipment still marked as functional. Emails from administration explicitly ordering nurses to falsify documentation. Budget spreadsheets showing money allocated for patient care being redirected to executive bonuses. Jesus Christ, Ortiz muttered. This is comprehensive. I'm a nurse. Documentation is kind of our thing. Reeves looked up. Nurse Hayes, this changes everything. What you've compiled here is enough to expand our investigation significantly. We're talking RICO charges, Medicaid fraud, Medicare fraud, conspiracy. This could bring down the entire executive structure. Good, Morgan said, and meant it. They kept her for another hour, asking detailed questions, confirming dates and names and specific incidents. By the time she left the conference room, it was nearly 11 a.m., and she'd missed half her shift. She headed back to the cardiac unit, expecting to catch hell from the charge nurse. Instead, she found Lisa waiting at the nurse's station with a strange expression. You need to see this, Lisa said quietly. She pulled Morgan into the medication room and closed the door, pulled out her phone, showed Morgan a group text chain that included half the hospital's nursing staff. Sarah, ICU. Is Hayes working with the feds? Mike, ER. Heard she's been in meetings all morning with investigators. Jennifer, MedSurg. Someone said she's the one who turned in Carver Tom. Float pool. Are we all getting investigated now? Rachel, NICU. I heard they're going through employee files. David, ortho. This is insane. Hayes just blew up the entire hospital. Morgan handed the phone back. They're scared. They're terrified. Morgan, people are saying you're a snitch, that you're trying to get everyone fired, that this is some kind of revenge because you got passed over for promotions. Do you believe that? Lisa hesitated. No, but I also don't know what's happening. None of us do. The hospital's in chaos. Half the managers are gone. We don't know who's in charge. We don't know if we're getting paid. We don't know if this place is even going to stay open. Morgan felt the weight of it settle on her shoulders. She'd thought about justice, about consequences for the people who'd let this hospital rot. She hadn't thought about the collateral fear, the nurses who'd just been trying to survive, suddenly worried they'd lose everything. This isn't about getting people fired, Morgan said. This is about fixing a broken system. The nurses aren't the problem. We never were. Then who is? The people who made millions while we were drowning. Lisa's phone buzzed. She glanced at it, paled. You need to get to the main lobby. Now. Morgan didn't ask why. She just went. The main lobby had been transformed into something resembling a war room. Federal agents were everywhere, carrying boxes of files, photographing equipment, interviewing staff. News crews had somehow gotten inside, despite security. And in the center of it all stood a woman Morgan recognized from television, Margaret Foster, Riverside General's CEO. Former CEO, technically, since she was currently flanked by lawyers and looking like she'd aged 10 years in 3 days. Foster saw Morgan and her expression twisted into something ugly. You, she pointed, her voice carrying across the crowded lobby. This is because of you. Every conversation stopped. Every camera turned. Morgan froze. You destroyed this hospital, Foster continued. Her voice shook. Rage or fear, hard to tell. 7 years you worked here. 7 years we gave you a job, a salary, opportunities. And this is how you repay us? By collaborating with federal investigators? By fabricating evidence? By assassinating the reputation of good people who dedicated their lives to healthcare? I didn't fabricate anything, Morgan said quietly. Liar. Foster's composure cracked completely. You fed them lies, manipulated data. You probably orchestrated that entire situation with General Locke just to get access to Margaret. One of her lawyers put a hand on her arm. Don't say another word. But Foster jerked away. No, she needs to hear this. Everyone needs to hear this. She addressed the cameras now, playing to the audience. This nurse, this disgruntled employee who couldn't hack it at a real hospital, has weaponized a federal investigation to pursue a personal vendetta. She's jeopardizing thousands of jobs, threatening essential medical services for this community, all because she was bitter about not getting promoted. Morgan's hands were shaking, not from fear, from fury. Is that true? A reporter shoved a microphone toward Morgan. Are you a disgruntled employee? Did you falsify evidence? Another reporter. What's your relationship with General Locke? The questions came fast, overlapping, aggressive. Morgan couldn't breathe. The lobby felt too small, too hot, too full of people who'd already decided she was either a hero or a villain, and she had no control over which narrative stuck. Enough. Director Reeves appeared from nowhere, stepping between Morgan and the cameras with the kind of authority that made people back up. This is an active federal investigation. No further comments will be made at this time. Ms. Foster, your lawyers are advised to contain your client before she says something that becomes additional evidence of obstruction. Foster's face went white. Reeves turned to Morgan. Come with me. They walked through a side corridor, away from cameras and questions, and Foster's desperate attempts to control a narrative that had already escaped her. Reeves didn't speak until they were in a private office with the door closed. Are you okay? Morgan realized she was crying. Hadn't noticed when it started. She just accused me of destroying the hospital in front of every news station in Cleveland. She's desperate. People say stupid things when they're desperate. Reeves handed Morgan a tissue. For what it's worth, she just gave us probable cause to examine her communications for witness tampering and defamation. So that was helpful. I don't feel helped. I feel like I just became the most hated person at this hospital. You're not. Reeves pulled out her phone, showed Morgan a different group text. This one was from the nursing union. Stephanie, union rep. Hayes did what we've been trying to do for years. Kevin, oncology. Finally, someone with the guts to speak up. Maria, Buds, pediatrics. She saved that general's life, and now she's saving ours. James, step down. Anyone giving Hayes shit needs to remember who actually made us work in these conditions. Nicole, float. Standing ovation for Morgan Hayes. The messages kept coming, dozens of them. Support, gratitude, relief. Morgan read them twice, trying to reconcile this version of reality with the one where she'd just been publicly accused of destroying a hospital. The people who are angry at you are the people who benefited from the system being broken, Reeves said. Everyone else is just scared. Fear makes people lash out. But once they see what we're actually doing here, once they realize this is about protecting them, not punishing them, the narrative will shift. And if it doesn't, then you'll be protected anyway. Federal whistleblower status means Riverside can't retaliate, can't fire you, can't demote you, can't make your life hell without facing additional charges. Reeves paused. But between you and me, I don't think you're planning to stay here much longer anyway. Morgan thought about the job offer from Summit Ridge, the one she'd accepted yesterday, the one that started in 2 weeks. No, she admitted, I'm not. Smart. This place is going to get worse before it gets better. Federal oversight means restructuring. That means audits, terminations, institutional chaos. Being here during that process would be, Reeves searched for the right word. Unpleasant. The rest of Monday passed in a blur. Morgan returned to her shift, took care of her 4 patients, ignored the stares and whispers from colleagues who didn't know what to make of her anymore. At 3 p.m., she was called back to the conference room. This time, there were 5 investigators, 2 lawyers, and a video link to General Locke. His face appeared on the screen, looking significantly better than when she'd last seen him. "Nurse Hayes, good to see you vertical." "General, you look better." "Clean living and excellent medical care. Thanks to you." He leaned forward slightly. "I've been briefed on today's events. Margaret Foster's outburst was unfortunate." That's one word for it. The word I'd use is actionable, but that's why I have lawyers. Locke's expression turned serious. "Listen, Morgan, what you've done here, what you're continuing to do, requires courage most people don't have. You're going to face backlash, intimidation, attempts to discredit you. These people built careers on corruption, and they're not going to surrender quietly." "I know." "Do you? Because it's going to get personal. They're going to dig into your life, your history, your daughter. They're going to look for anything they can use to undermine your credibility." Morgan's stomach dropped. "Emma? She's fine, but I've arranged for security monitoring on your home and her school, just as a precaution. These are white-collar criminals, not violent offenders, but desperate people make unpredictable choices." The idea of anyone even thinking about her daughter made Morgan's vision narrow. If they go near her, they won't. That's why we're being proactive. Locke's voice was calm, steady. "You have my word, Morgan. Your family is protected, but you need to be smart. Don't engage with media. Don't respond to accusations. Let the evidence speak. Let the lawyers handle the noise. You just keep doing what you do best. Take care of patients and tell the truth." Morgan nodded, not trusting her voice. The video call ended. The investigators continued asking questions, hours of them, drilling down into specific incidents, specific financial discrepancies, specific instances of falsified documentation. By the time they finished, it was after 7 p.m., and Morgan's brain felt like it had been wrung out. She drove home in darkness, checking her rearview mirror more than usual. Emma was at a friend's house for a study group. The house was empty. Quiet. Morgan made tea she didn't drink and sat at the kitchen table staring at nothing. Her phone buzzed, a text from a number she didn't recognize. "You made a mistake. Walk away now before you lose everything." Morgan blocked the number. 10 minutes later, another text from a different number. "People are watching you. You're not as protected as you think." She blocked that one too. Then another came. And another. By 9 p.m., she'd received 17 threatening texts from different numbers, none explicitly violent, all carefully worded to sound like warnings instead of threats. But the message was clear: back off or face consequences. Morgan forwarded all of them to Director Reeves. The response came immediately, documenting everything. "These idiots are building our case for us. Stay safe." Emma came home at 9:30, bright and chattering about chemistry homework and college applications, and completely unaware that her mother had spent the day becoming the center of a federal investigation and the target of harassment campaigns. Morgan listened to her daughter talk about normal things and felt the disconnect like whiplash. "Mom?" Emma paused, studying her face. "You okay? You look exhausted." "Long day at work." "The hospital's all over the news. They're saying the whole administration was corrupt. Is that true?" Morgan chose her words carefully. "It's complicated, but yes, there were serious problems. People are trying to fix them now." "Were you part of fixing them?" "I'm trying to be." Emma hugged her suddenly, fiercely. "I'm proud of you. Whatever you did, whatever happens, I'm proud of you." Morgan held her daughter and tried not to cry for the second time that day. Tuesday started with a phone call at 5 a.m. Morgan answered without checking the number, thinking it was the hospital calling her in early. "Nurse Hayes?" A woman's voice. Professional, clipped. "This is Amanda Voss from Channel 7 News. I'd like to interview you about your role in the Riverside General investigation. We're running a segment tonight at 6, and..." Morgan hung up. The phone rang again immediately. Different number, different reporter, same request. By the time she got to work, her voicemail was full. 23 messages from various media outlets, all wanting interviews, all promising fair coverage, all lying through their teeth because fair coverage didn't exist when the story was this volatile. The hospital felt different on Tuesday. Quieter. Almost empty. Morgan badged in and found the emergency department running with skeleton staff. Half the units were on diversion, sending patients to other hospitals because they didn't have capacity. The cafeteria was closed. The main lobby was still full of federal agents, but now they were seizing computers and escorting people out in handcuffs. Morgan recognized one of them, Gerald Atkins, Vice President of Operations. The man who'd approved executive suite renovations while nurses were reusing supplies meant to be single-use. He saw her watching, and his expression curdled into pure hatred. "This is your fault," he hissed as agents led him past. "You destroyed everything we built." "You destroyed it yourself," Morgan said. "I just made sure people noticed." By mid-morning, 3 more executives had been arrested. By noon, the hospital's board of directors had held an emergency meeting and resigned en masse. By 2 p.m., Director Reeves was holding a press conference announcing federal receivership. Riverside General was now under direct government oversight until new leadership could be established. Morgan watched the press conference on the break room television. Reeves was calm, professional, devastating. She outlined the scope of fraud, the endangered patients, the nurses forced to work in dangerous conditions. She didn't name Morgan specifically, but every reporter knew who'd provided the evidence. "Are you a hero or a snitch?" The question came from behind her. Morgan turned. Marcus from Surgical was standing in the doorway, arms crossed. "I don't know," Morgan said honestly. "Maybe both. People are losing their jobs. My friend in administration got escorted out this morning. She's got 2 kids and a mortgage. Now she's unemployed because you decided to play whistleblower. Your friend in administration helped falsify federal compliance reports. She committed fraud. She was following orders. Following orders isn't a defense, especially when patients are dying." Marcus's jaw tightened. "You think you're better than everyone else. Think you're some kind of crusader, but you just made everything worse. This hospital's going to close. Hundreds of people are going to lose healthcare access. Thousands are going to lose jobs. And you get to ride off into the sunset feeling righteous. If the hospital closes, it's because the people running it destroyed it from the inside. I just documented what was already happening. Tell that to the single mothers getting laid off. Tell that to the patients who won't have anywhere to go for emergency care." Marcus shook his head. "You didn't save anything, Morgan. You just burned it all down." He left before she could respond. Morgan sat alone in the break room and wondered if he was right. If this was justice or just destruction. If there was even a difference anymore. Her shift ended at 3. She drove home, made dinner, Emma wouldn't eat because she had plans with friends, and sat in the kitchen scrolling through news coverage of the Riverside scandal. The comment sections were vicious. She's a hero for exposing corruption. She's a traitor who destroyed a community hospital. Typical disgruntled employee with an axe to grind. Finally, someone with the courage to speak up. The narratives contradicted each other, competed. Morgan existed in the space between them, neither hero nor villain, just a nurse who'd made a choice and was living with the consequences. Wednesday brought new developments. The FBI announced expanded charges, not just fraud, but racketeering, conspiracy, money laundering. Dr. Carver was facing 30 years in federal prison. Margaret Foster was facing 40. 3 other executives had already taken plea deals in exchange for testimony, and Morgan was called to testify before a grand jury. The courthouse was in downtown Cleveland, all marble and security checkpoints. Morgan sat in a witness room for 2 hours before they called her name. The grand jury was smaller than she expected. 23 people who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else, listening to a prosecutor methodically present evidence of healthcare fraud. Morgan testified for 90 minutes, answered questions about staffing, equipment, patient care, falsified records. She was calm, precise, professional. When they asked if she'd witnessed any of the executives explicitly ordering nurses to falsify documentation, she said yes and provided dates, times, and email evidence. When they asked if she believed patients had died as a result of the hospital's actions, she said yes and described the cases in detail. When they dismissed her, the prosecutor thanked her for her service. Morgan wanted to laugh. Service. like she'd volunteered for this instead of being dragged into it by circumstance and conscience. She left the courthouse and found Director Reeves waiting outside. "You did well in there," Reeves said. "How do you know? You weren't in the room." "The prosecutor texted me. Said you were one of the most credible witnesses he's seen in 15 years. Reeves gestured toward a coffee shop across the street. "Buy you a coffee? We need to talk." They sat in a corner booth. Reeves ordered black coffee. Morgan ordered tea she wouldn't drink. "The grand jury is going to indict," Reeves said without preamble. "Probably by end of week. Once that happens, this becomes very public, very fast. Trials, media coverage. Your name is going to be everywhere." "It's already everywhere. Not like this. Right now you're a footnote in news articles. After indictments, you're going to be the star witness in a federal prosecution. Defense attorneys are going to try to destroy your credibility. They're going to claim you had personal motivations. They're going to dig up every mistake you've ever made and parade it in front of cameras." Morgan's tea went cold in her hands. "I can handle it." "Can you?" "Because I've seen witnesses crack under this kind of pressure. I've seen people with ironclad testimonies fall apart when defense lawyers start asking about their college drinking habits, or their divorce, or that time they got a parking ticket. These lawyers are professionals at making honest people look dishonest." "What do you want me to do?" "I want you to be prepared. Get a lawyer. A good one. Federal Defender's Office will assign you counsel, but you want someone who specializes in whistleblower cases. Someone who can protect you when this gets ugly." "I can't afford—" "General Locke already arranged it. Pro bono representation from one of the best firms in D.C. They'll contact you by end of day." Reeves leaned forward. "Morgan, listen to me. What you did was right. It was brave. It was necessary. But that doesn't mean it's going to be easy. The next few months are going to test you in ways you can't imagine. Stay strong. Stay honest. Don't let them make you question yourself." Morgan nodded, throat tight. "And one more thing." Reeves slid a folder across the table. "This arrived this morning. Thought you should see it before it goes public." Morgan opened the folder. Inside was a letter on Official Department of Health and Human Services letterhead addressed to her. "Dear Ms. Hayes, in recognition of your extraordinary courage in exposing systemic fraud and patient endangerment at Riverside General Hospital, you are hereby awarded the Federal Healthcare Integrity Award. This commendation acknowledges individuals who demonstrate exceptional dedication to protecting patients and ensuring accountability in healthcare systems." The letter continued with formal language about award ceremonies and public recognition. Morgan read it twice and felt nothing. No pride, no satisfaction, just exhaustion. "They want to give me an award," she said flatly. "You deserve it." "I don't want it. I want the hospital to be fixed. I want nurses to have safe working conditions. I want patients to get the care they deserve. I don't want a ceremony." "Sometimes you don't get to choose. Sometimes the recognition comes whether you want it or not." Reeves finished her coffee. "But for what it's worth, I understand. Heroes rarely want to be heroes. They just want things to be better." Morgan went home that night and found Emma waiting with news. She'd been accepted into a pre-med summer program at Case Western Reserve University. Full scholarship, an opportunity that could change her entire trajectory toward medical school. "Mom, this is huge!" Emma was practically bouncing. "This program has a 95% acceptance rate to top medical schools. If I do well, I could—" She stopped, seeing Morgan's face. "What's wrong? I thought you'd be excited." "I am excited. I'm so proud of you." Morgan pulled her daughter into a hug. "You're going to do amazing things." "Then why do you look like you're about to cry?" Because Morgan was realizing her daughter was going to become a doctor in a healthcare system that was broken in ways she was only beginning to understand. Because Emma would face the same impossible choices. Because nothing Morgan was doing now would be enough to fix everything that needed fixing. But she just said, "Happy tears, promise." Thursday brought the indictments. 17 people charged with conspiracy to defraud Medicare and Medicaid. 3 facing additional charges of criminal negligence resulting in patient deaths. Margaret Foster's face was plastered across every news outlet with the words, "Former CEO faces 40 years" underneath. And Morgan's phone exploded. Reporters, colleagues, distant relatives she hadn't spoken to in years, all suddenly wanting to talk. Lawyers from the defense teams trying to contact her despite explicit instructions not to. Advocacy groups wanting her to speak at conferences. Publishers wanting her to write a book. Morgan turned off her phone and went to work. Friday was her last shift at Riverside General before starting at Summit Ridge on Monday. The cardiac unit was running with minimal staff. Half the nurses had quit, transferred, or been reassigned during the chaos. Morgan took care of 6 patients instead of 4, working doubles she didn't have to because the alternative was leaving them understaffed. At 2 p.m., she was in a patient's room when Lisa appeared in the doorway looking pale. "Morgan, lobby, now." Morgan handed off her patients and went downstairs expecting more federal agents or more media or more crisis. Instead, she found 300 hospital employees packed into the lobby: nurses, technicians, environmental services, cafeteria workers, physical therapists, social workers. Every department represented. They stood in silence, and as Morgan appeared at the top of the stairs, they began to applaud. The sound was deafening, overwhelming. Morgan stood frozen as people she'd worked with for years, people who'd whispered about her, questioned her, doubted her, clapped until their hands must have hurt. Some were crying, others were smiling, a few held signs. "Thank you for speaking up. You saved this hospital." Nurses' support. Nurses. Lisa was beside her suddenly, pressing a microphone into her hands. "Say something." Morgan looked at 300 faces, looked at the cameras that had somehow gotten inside again, looked at the massive weight of expectation pressing down on her. "I didn't do this alone," she said. Her voice cracked. She cleared her throat and tried again. "I didn't do this alone. Every nurse here knows what I'm talking about. Every tech. Every person who's worked doubles because there wasn't coverage. Every person who's made supplies stretch because budget was limited. Every person who's watched patients suffer because the system was broken. You all saw it. You all knew. I just happened to be the one who got lucky enough to have someone listen when I spoke up." The crowd was silent now. "This hospital's going to change," Morgan continued. "It has to. But the change won't mean anything if we don't remember why it was necessary. If we don't remember the patients who deserved better, the staff who deserved better. If we don't commit to making sure this never happens again." She paused. "I'm leaving Monday, starting a new job. But you all are staying. You're the ones who'll rebuild this place. Make it better. Make it what it should have been all along. Make it somewhere nurses want to work and patients can trust." She handed the microphone back to Lisa and walked away before anyone could ask more questions. Her locker was in the staff changing room. She cleaned it out slowly, 7 years of accumulated belongings fitting into a single box. Photos, extra scrubs, the Employee of the Month certificates she'd never bothered taking home. A card Emma had made her in 3rd grade that said, "My mom saves lives," in crayon. "You really leaving?" Janet stood in the doorway. "Yeah. Can't say I blame you. This place is a disaster. It's getting better. Maybe..." Janet came closer. "Listen, I owe you an apology. I was one of the people talking shit about you earlier this week. Said you were just trying to get revenge. I was wrong. It's okay. It's not. But I get it now. What you did took guts. More than most of us have." Janet held out her hand. "Good luck in Denver." Morgan shook it. "Thanks." She finished her shift, said goodbye to patients who'd become familiar faces, hugged Lisa and Marcus and a dozen other nurses who'd supported her through the chaos. At 7 p.m., she walked out of Riverside General for the last time as an employee. The parking lot was mostly empty. Morgan's car was in the far corner where she always parked. She was halfway there when she heard footsteps behind her. She turned. A man stood 10 feet away. Expensive suit, cold eyes, someone she didn't recognize but whose posture screamed corporate lawyer. "Nurse Hayes," he said. "We need to talk." Morgan's hand found her keys, positioned them between her fingers the way she'd been taught in self-defense classes years ago. "I'm not authorized to speak with you. Contact my attorney." "This isn't about the case." He stepped closer. Morgan stepped back. "This is about choices. Specifically, the choice you're going to make when you realize how much easier your life would be if you developed amnesia about certain details of your testimony. Are you threatening me? I'm offering you clarity. Another step forward. My clients are willing to be very generous to witnesses who suddenly remember things differently. College fund for your daughter, new house, six-figure consulting fees. All you have to do is admit you might have been mistaken about some of the things you saw. Morgan's pulse hammered. Get away from me. Or what? You'll call security? He smiled. This conversation never happened, Ms. Hayes, just like your testimony could never happen. Think about it. Think about Emma. Think about her future. Think about how much easier things would be if you just... A car door slammed. Both of them turned. Director Reeves stepped out of an unmarked sedan, followed by two FBI agents. Funny thing about federal investigations, we tend to put surveillance on key witnesses. She looked at the lawyer. Especially when we suspect attempted witness tampering. The man's face went ashen. You have the right to remain silent, one of the agents said, already reaching for handcuffs. Morgan watched them arrest him, watched another piece of the conspiracy crumble, and felt something shift inside her chest. Not satisfaction. Something colder. Harder. These people weren't going to stop. They were going to keep coming, keep threatening, keep trying to protect the empire they'd built on other people's suffering. And Morgan was going to keep fighting back until every single one of them faced consequences. Reeves approached once the lawyer was in custody. You okay? Yeah. That was stupid of him. We've had eyes on you since Monday. Figured someone would try something eventually. She paused. Go home, Morgan. Get some sleep. Monday starts your new life. You deserve it. Morgan drove home, parked in the driveway, sat in silence for 10 minutes before going inside. Emma was at the kitchen table doing homework. She looked up when Morgan entered. Mom, you're late. Long day, last shift. How do you feel? Morgan thought about it. Thought about the applause, the threats, the arrests, the weight of everything that had happened and everything still coming. I feel, she said slowly, like I just jumped off a cliff and I'm waiting to see if I can fly. Emma smiled. You're going to fly. Morgan's phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. She almost didn't check it. Had learned this week that unknown numbers rarely meant good news, but something made her look. Phase 2 complete. Monday, the real battle begins. Lock. Morgan stared at the message, felt ice crystallize in her veins, because she realized suddenly that everything up to now, the arrests, the investigation, the indictments, had been preliminary, gathering evidence, building the case, securing witnesses. The actual trial was going to be something else entirely. And somewhere in Virginia, General Adrian Locke was planning something that was going to shake Riverside General to its foundations. Morgan typed back, What happens Monday? The response came 30 seconds later. You'll see. Trust me. Then nothing. Morgan sat in her kitchen, phone in hand, and felt the certainty settle over her like armor. Whatever came next, she was ready. Monday morning arrived with snow that turned Cleveland into a grayscale photograph. Morgan stood in Summit Ridge Medical Center's gleaming lobby at 7 a.m., credentials badge clipped to her new navy scrubs, and felt the dissonance like vertigo. Everything here was clean, new, functional. The equipment actually worked. The staffing ratios made sense. There was coffee in the break room that didn't taste like battery acid. It felt wrong, like she'd escaped something while others were still trapped. Her orientation packet was thorough. Benefits overview, departmental protocols, emergency procedures that were actually followed instead of just printed and filed. The clinical director position came with an office, an actual office with a door and a window and a desk that wasn't scarred from years of abuse. Morgan sat in the chair and stared at the empty walls and thought about the box of belongings she'd cleaned out of her Riverside locker. Her phone buzzed. Emma. First day. First. How is it? Is it amazing? Are they treating you like the boss you are? Morgan smiled despite the knot in her stomach. Typed back. It's good. Different. Miss you. Miss you too. Knock 'em dead, Mom. The morning passed in a blur of introductions and policy reviews. Morgan met nurses who seemed genuinely happy to be at work, physicians who spoke to staff like colleagues instead of subordinates, administrators who asked about patient care concerns instead of dismissing them. It was surreal. At 11 a.m., her phone rang. Director Reeves. Morgan, we have a problem. The knot in Morgan's stomach pulled tighter. What kind of problem? The kind where Margaret Foster just posted bail, and her first move was hiring the most aggressive PR firm in Ohio. They're launching a media campaign today at noon. Press conference, multiple outlets. The narrative is that you're a disgruntled employee who fabricated evidence to destroy innocent people. Morgan sat down hard. That's insane. The evidence is documented, verified, multiple sources. Facts don't matter when you're dealing with spin doctors. Foster's team is going to paint her as a dedicated healthcare professional who made tough budget decisions in a struggling hospital. They're going to claim you had a personal vendetta, that you manipulated General Locke, that you're seeking fame and fortune at the expense of good people. Can they do that? Legally? It's all carefully worded to avoid defamation charges. They're not saying you lied. They're saying you might have been mistaken, might have misinterpreted things, might have had ulterior motives. Reeves paused. Morgan, this is going to get ugly. They're going to dig into your life. Every mistake, every weakness. They're going to try to destroy your credibility before the trial even starts. Let them try. I admire the confidence, but you need to understand what's coming. These people are professionals. They know exactly how to manipulate public opinion. By tonight, half of Cleveland is going to think you're either a hero or a liar, and the other half won't know what to believe. Morgan looked out her office window at Denver's skyline, clean and distant and completely removed from the mess she'd left behind. What do you need me to do? Stay silent. Don't respond to media. Don't engage on social media. Let your lawyers handle communications. And for the love of everything, don't watch the press conference. Morgan watched the press conference. She couldn't help it. Pulled it up on her phone at noon, sound turned low, sitting in her new office while Margaret Foster stood in front of a dozen microphones looking like a victim instead of a criminal. I dedicated 32 years to Riverside General Hospital, Foster said, her voice trembling with practiced emotion. 32 years serving this community, protecting jobs, ensuring quality care under increasingly difficult circumstances. And now I'm being vilified by someone with a personal agenda who weaponized a tragic medical emergency to pursue a vendetta. The reporters ate it up. Questions flew. Ms. Foster, are you saying Nurse Hayes fabricated evidence? I'm saying that when you're looking for corruption, you can interpret innocent actions through a lens of suspicion. Budget decisions that were necessary for the hospital's survival have been twisted into criminal acts, emails taken out of context, financial records misrepresented. What about the patients who died due to equipment failures? Foster's expression shifted to calculated grief. Every patient death is a tragedy, but equipment fails. People make mistakes. These are risks inherent in healthcare. To blame dedicated professionals for circumstances beyond their control, to turn normal hospital operations into a criminal conspiracy, is unconscionable. Morgan's hands shook, and she wanted to throw the phone across the room, wanted to scream that Foster was lying, that the equipment failures weren't random, that patients died because money meant for their care went into executive bonuses. But she stayed silent, watched Foster play the victim, watched reporters nod sympathetically, watched the narrative shift in real time. Her phone rang again. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer. Morgan Hayes? A woman's voice, young, aggressive. This is Jennifer Walsh from Cleveland today. I'd like to get your response to Margaret Foster's allegations that you... Morgan hung up, blocked the number. 3 more calls came immediately from different numbers, all reporters, all wanting her side of the story. She turned off her phone. The afternoon was supposed to be spent shadowing the outgoing clinical director, learning systems and procedures. Instead, Morgan sat through meetings while her mind was 3 states away, watching her reputation get shredded on live television. By 3 p.m., the Foster press conference had been picked up nationally. By 4 p.m., Morgan's face was on cable news with chyrons that read, "Hospital whistleblower or disgruntled employee." Her new colleagues were too polite to mention it, but she saw them glancing at their phones, whispering, wondering if they'd just hired someone who was either brave or insane or lying. At 5 p.m., Morgan's attorney called. Alexander Chen, the D.C. lawyer Locke had arranged. His voice was calm in the way that meant everything was definitely not calm. We need to talk about your testimony strategy. I thought I just had to tell the truth. You do, but truth is only half the battle. The other half is delivery. Foster's defense team is going to try to rattle you, make you angry, make you defensive, make you look unreliable. We need to prepare you for that. When? Tonight. I'm flying to Denver. We'll meet at 7. Morgan met Alexander Chen in a conference room at his firm's Denver satellite office. He was younger than she expected, maybe 40, sharp suit, sharper eyes. He came with an associate named Sarah Kim, who took notes while Chen walked Morgan through what he called hostile examination scenarios. They're going to start with your employment record, Chen said. 7 years at Riverside, never promoted, never advanced. Why? Because I was good at my job and they needed me on the floor. Wrong answer. That sounds bitter. Try again. Morgan bristled. It's the truth. Truth that sounds like bitterness. Defense will twist it into resentment. They'll say you were passed over because you weren't qualified, that you blamed others for your stalled career, that you saw the investigation as an opportunity for revenge. Chen leaned forward. Try again. Why weren't you promoted? Morgan took a breath, tried to separate emotion from fact. I focused on direct patient care. I submitted improvement proposals that were rejected by administration. I prioritized bedside nursing over administrative advancement. Better. Not perfect, but better. Chen made a note. They're going to ask about your relationship with General Locke. They'll imply impropriety. They'll suggest you orchestrated the airport incident. That's ridiculous. Of course it is. But they don't need it to be true. They just need to plant doubt. How long did you know General Locke before the cardiac event? I didn't know him at all. Can you prove that? How do you prove you don't know someone? Exactly. Which is why they'll ask. They'll make it sound suspicious that a random nurse happened to save a general who happened to be investigating her hospital. They'll ask if you knew his identity when you started CPR. I didn't. Did you check his wallet, his briefcase, his identification? No, he was dying. I was trying to save his life. But you can't prove you didn't check. See the problem? Chen pulled out another file. They're going to dig into your finances. Look for unusual deposits, large purchases, anything that suggests you were paid off or had financial motivation. I live paycheck to paycheck. I don't have unusual deposits. You accepted a check from General Locke. $15,000. Morgan's stomach dropped. That was for Emma's education. It was a gift. It's a payment from the man whose investigation destroyed the hospital where you worked. Defense will call it a bribe. They'll say you were compensated for your testimony before you even gave it. Chen's expression softened slightly. I'm not saying they're right. I'm saying this is what they'll argue. We need to be ready. They spent 3 hours running scenarios. Chen played defense attorney, aggressive, accusatory, relentless. He questioned every detail of Morgan's testimony, twisted her words, made innocent actions sound sinister. By the time they finished, Morgan felt like she'd been through a psychological meat grinder. You did well, Chen said as they packed up. But you need to practice more. We'll do this again tomorrow, and the day after, every day until the trial. When does the trial start? Federal cases move fast when there's overwhelming evidence, probably 6 weeks, maybe 8. He paused. Morgan, I need you to understand something. These people are going to try to break you. They're going to make you doubt yourself, make you question whether speaking up was worth it. They're going to target your daughter, your career, your credibility, and they're going to do it legally, professionally, with smiles on their faces. I can handle it. Can you? Because I've seen strong people crumble under this pressure. I've seen witnesses recant, develop convenient amnesia, suddenly remember things differently. The defense knows this. They're counting on it. Morgan met his eyes. I'm not recanting. I'm not backing down. Tell me what I need to do to win. Chen smiled, sharp and approving. Stay angry, but control it, channel it, use it. Don't let them see you break. Morgan flew back to Cleveland the next morning. Emma had questions about the press conference, about Foster's claims, about whether Morgan was in trouble. Morgan answered carefully, omitting the parts about bribery allegations and character assassination, and the very real possibility that she'd be destroyed on a witness stand in front of cameras and the world. "Are you scared?" Emma asked. "Terrified." "But you're still doing it." "Yeah." Emma hugged her. "Then you're braver than I thought." The next 2 weeks were a war fought on multiple fronts. Morgan worked at Summit Ridge during the day, learning systems, building relationships, trying to be the clinical director they'd hired. At night, she drilled with Chen and his team, preparing for testimony, practicing responses, learning how to stay calm under verbal assault. The media circus intensified. Foster's PR team rolled out a coordinated campaign, sympathetic interviews, opinion pieces, social media blitzes. They positioned her as a dedicated professional destroyed by an ambitious nurse and overzealous federal prosecutors. They found former Riverside employees willing to defend the administration. They highlighted charity work and community involvement. They made Foster look like a martyr. Morgan's side stayed quiet. No interviews, no public statements, just silence while the narrative shifted and twisted and turned her into something she wasn't. At Summit Ridge, colleagues started treating her differently, carefully, like she was fragile or dangerous, or both. The CNO called her in for a check-in that was really an assessment of whether Morgan's baggage was going to become the hospital's problem. "We stand by our hiring decision," the CNO said, "but we need to know you're focused, that the situation in Cleveland isn't going to interfere with your responsibilities here. It won't. The trial is going to be public. Your face will be on television. That reflects on Summit Ridge." "I understand." "Do you? Because if this becomes a distraction, if our hospital gets dragged into your scandal, we'll need to reconsider the arrangement." Morgan felt the ground shift under her feet. "Are you threatening to fire me?" "I'm asking you to consider whether this position is sustainable given your circumstances. Perhaps a leave of absence until the trial concludes would be appropriate." "I need this job. I have a daughter. I have a mortgage. And we have a hospital to run. Think about it." Morgan left the meeting understanding that her new position was contingent on not being too controversial. Stay quiet, stay invisible. Don't make waves. Exactly what she'd been trying to escape at Riverside. That night, Chen called with an update. "They're accelerating the trial date. Judge wants this resolved before election season heats up. We go to court in 3 weeks." 3 weeks? You said 6 to 8. Things changed. Foster's team is pushing for a speedy trial. They think public sentiment is shifting in their favor. They want to capitalize on momentum before more evidence comes out. "What more evidence?" "We've been holding back some findings, saving them for trial. Financial records that show Foster and the other executives created shell companies to funnel hospital funds. Patient death data that proves statistically significant increases in mortality corresponding to budget cuts. Whistleblower testimony from other hospitals where some of these executives previously worked." Chen paused. "The prosecution has a nuclear bomb, Morgan, but we need you to detonate it." "How?" "Your testimony is the emotional center of the case. You're the nurse who saw it happening, who tried to stop it, who saved a general's life and exposed a conspiracy. The jury needs to connect with you, believe you, trust you. If you falter, if you seem uncertain or bitter or vindictive, everything falls apart." "No pressure." "All the pressure in the world, but I've seen you prep. You're ready." Morgan wasn't sure she believed that. The next week brought a development nobody expected. 3 more nurses from Riverside came forward. They contacted the FBI with their own documentation of falsified records, unsafe conditions, and administrative pressure to hide problems. Their testimony corroborated everything Morgan had said, provided independent verification, destroyed Foster's narrative about a single disgruntled employee. The media coverage shifted slightly. Not entirely. Foster's PR machine was still churning out victim content. But now there were cracks, questions. Reporters started asking why multiple witnesses were saying the same things. Then Riverside General announced it was closing its emergency department indefinitely due to staffing challenges and federal oversight complications. The community exploded. Protests, town halls, angry families demanding answers about where they were supposed to go for emergency care. Foster's team blamed Morgan, called her a healthcare terrorist who destroyed a community institution. The PR assault was vicious and coordinated. Morgan's phone wouldn't stop ringing, death threats mixed with messages of support. Reporters offering six figures for exclusive interviews. Lawyers from defense teams trying to contact her despite court orders. Advocacy groups wanting her to speak. Publishers wanting her story. She turned off all notifications except texts from Emma and calls from Chen. Summit Ridge's CNO called her in again. The board has concerns. This situation is creating negative publicity for the hospital. Perhaps that leave of absence. I haven't done anything wrong. You're a lightning rod for controversy. Every time your name appears in the news, Summit Ridge gets mentioned. That's not the kind of attention we want. So you want me to quit? I want you to consider what's best for everyone involved. Morgan walked out of the meeting and called Chen. They're going to fire me. They can't. Whistleblower protections extend to subsequent employment. If they terminate you because of the Riverside situation, that's retaliation. We'll sue. Great. Another lawsuit. That'll really help my reputation. Morgan, listen to me. You're in the worst part right now, the part where it looks like everything is falling apart. But we're 2 weeks from trial, 2 weeks from putting these people in front of a jury, 2 weeks from making them answer for what they did. Can you hold on for 2 weeks? Do I have a choice? No. The trial date arrived like an execution. Morgan flew to Cleveland the night before, stayed in a hotel near the courthouse, barely slept. Chen met her at 6 a.m. to run through final preparations. His confidence felt forced. Prosecution opens today. They'll lay out the case, show the evidence, establish the conspiracy, then they'll call witnesses. You're scheduled for day 3. That gives us time to see how things are going. Adjust strategy if needed. What if it's going badly? Then we adjust faster. The courthouse was a zoo. News vans lined the streets, protesters on both sides, some supporting Morgan and the whistleblowers, others defending Foster and the executives. Security was tight. Federal marshals everywhere. The courtroom was packed. Every seat filled, cameras positioned, sketch artists ready. Morgan sat in the gallery with other witnesses. Watched the prosecution's opening statement. The lead prosecutor was a woman named Diana Torres, severe and precise. She outlined the conspiracy methodically. Federal funds diverted, patient care compromised, staff endangered, records falsified. This case is about greed disguised as health care, Torres said, about executives who treated a hospital like a personal bank account, while nurses worked themselves to exhaustion and patients died from neglect. The evidence will show systematic fraud spanning 3 years and involving 17 defendants who prioritized profit over every principle of medical ethics. The defense opening was delivered by a man named Robert Kessler, silver-haired, expensive suit, voice like warm honey. He painted Foster as a dedicated professional making impossible choices in an underfunded system. The prosecution wants you to believe this is a story of villains and victims, but the real story is about a struggling hospital trying to survive in a broken healthcare system, about administrators making difficult budget decisions with limited resources, about a disgruntled employee who weaponized a personal relationship with a federal investigator to destroy innocent lives. Morgan watched the jury, 12 faces, some sympathetic to prosecution, some to defense, some impossible to read. Day 1 ended with the prosecution presenting financial evidence, shell companies, diverted funds, executive bonuses. The numbers were devastating. Millions of dollars stolen while nurses begged for basic supplies. Day 2 brought patient advocates. Families of people who died at Riverside testified about substandard care, ignored complaints, systemic failures. A mother whose son died from a preventable infection because equipment wasn't properly sterilized broke down on the stand. The jury watched in silence. The defense cross-examined aggressively, trying to establish that patient deaths were normal hospital outcomes, not evidence of criminal negligence. They highlighted survival statistics, national averages, industry standards. They made it sound like Riverside was typical, not exceptional in its failures. Day 3. Morgan's day. She arrived at the courthouse at 7 a.m. Chen walked her through final prep in a conference room that smelled like old coffee and anxiety. Remember, stay calm, answer directly, don't elaborate unless asked. If you don't know something, say so. If you don't remember, say so. Don't guess. Don't speculate. Just facts. I know? And when Kessler comes at you, because he will come at you, don't take the bait. He's going to try to make you angry, defensive. He's going to accuse you of lying, of having ulterior motives, of fabricating evidence. You stay calm. You stay focused. You don't engage. What if he brings up Emma? Chen's expression darkened. If he goes after your daughter, I'll object. But judges sometimes allow character questions. If he asks about the education fund from Locke, you tell the truth. It was a gift from a grateful patient, nothing more. At 9 a.m., Morgan was sworn in. Her hand shook as she placed it on the Bible. She promised to tell the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth. Sat in the witness box, looked out at a courtroom full of strangers and cameras and people who'd already decided what they believed about her. Prosecutor Torres approached with a kind smile. Good morning, Ms. Hayes. Please state your name and occupation for the record. Morgan Hayes. I'm a registered nurse, currently clinical director at Summit Ridge Medical Center in Denver. And prior to that position, I worked at Riverside General Hospital in Cleveland for 7 years. Torres walked her through her background. Education, experience, employment history. Established her as credible, experienced, dedicated. Then shifted to the day at the airport. Tell us what happened on February 27th. Morgan described it. The briefcase. The man collapsing. The CPR. Missing her flight. The whole sequence of events that had led to this moment. Did you know General Locke's identity when you began treatment? No, he was a patient who needed help. That's all I knew. When did you learn he was investigating Riverside General? After he was admitted to the hospital, he told me himself. Torres introduced the documentation Morgan had provided. The falsified records, the budget discrepancies, the equipment failures, photo after photo, email after email. The evidence was overwhelming. Why did you compile this documentation? Because I thought someday someone might listen. Someone might care enough to fix things. Did you ever consider that coming forward might cost you your job, your reputation? Yes. Why did you do it anyway? Morgan looked at the jury, 12 faces watching her, judging her, deciding her credibility. Because patients were dying, she said simply. And nobody was stopping it. Torres asked detailed questions about specific incidents, specific patients, specific failures. Morgan answered each one with facts and dates and medical terminology that painted a picture of systemic neglect. The jury took notes. Some looked sympathetic, others remained neutral. After 2 hours, Torres yielded to defense. Robert Kessler stood, smiled, approached the witness box like they were old friends. Ms. Hayes, you've had quite a journey, haven't you? Floor nurse to federal witness to clinical director. That's impressive. I don't know if impressive is the right word. No? What word would you use? Necessary. Necessary. Kessler let the word hang. Tell me, when did you first decide Riverside General was corrupt? I didn't decide anything. I observed. I documented. When did you start documenting? About 3 years ago. 3 years? That's a long time to compile evidence against your employer. Why not come forward sooner? I didn't know who to tell. I tried reporting issues through proper channels. Nothing changed. So you just kept working there? Kept taking a paycheck from a hospital you believed was killing patients? Morgan felt the trap. Stayed calm. I stayed because leaving would have meant abandoning the patients who needed someone to care. Or because you needed the job and couldn't afford to quit. Both can be true. Kessler pulled out a document. According to your employment record, you submitted applications to 3 other hospitals in the past 5 years. All rejected. That must have been frustrating. Chen stood. Objection. Relevance. I'm establishing the witness's state of mind and potential motivations. The judge nodded. Overruled. You may answer, Ms. Hayes. Morgan met Kessler's eyes. I applied to other positions because I wanted to advance my career. I was rejected for various reasons. That's normal in healthcare. Is it normal to blame your employer for those rejections? I didn't blame anyone. I continued doing my job. Until you met General Locke. Until I saved General Locke's life. Convenient timing, wasn't it? You're scheduled for an interview in Denver. You're about to leave Riverside. And suddenly you're the hero who saves a general investigating your hospital. Kessler's voice was smooth, insinuating, almost like it was planned. It wasn't planned. It was chance. Was it chance that you had extensive documentation ready to hand over, that you'd been compiling evidence for years? That seems less like chance and more like preparation. I documented problems because I hoped someone would eventually fix them. When General Locke told me about the investigation, I provided evidence. That's not a conspiracy. That's cooperation. Kessler switched tactics. Let's talk about this evidence. These photos of broken equipment. How do we know when they were taken? The metadata shows dates and times. Metadata can be altered. Not by me. I don't have those skills. But someone could have. Chen objected. The judge sustained. Kessler moved on. You claim patients died due to equipment failures. But people die in hospitals every day, don't they? Yes. And sometimes equipment fails despite proper maintenance? Yes. So how can you be certain these deaths were caused by administrative neglect rather than unfortunate medical outcomes? Morgan took a breath. Because I saw the pattern. Saw equipment fail repeatedly. Saw maintenance requests ignored. Saw budget allocated for repairs being redirected. Saw patients decline because we didn't have functioning tools to help them. You saw. You believe. But do you have medical proof that connects specific deaths to specific equipment failures? I have documentation of medical proof, Ms. Hayes, autopsy reports, expert testimony, definitive causation. The patients who died didn't get autopsies because the families couldn't afford them and the hospital didn't require them. So no proof. The proof is in the pattern. Patterns can be coincidental. Kessler smiled. Let's talk about your relationship with General Locke. How many times have you spoken with him since the airport incident? I don't know exactly. Several times. Did he give you money? Morgan's pulse spiked. He gave my daughter an education fund, $15,000, as a thank you for saving his life. $15,000 from a man whose investigation benefits from your testimony. Some might call that a bribe. It was a gift. A gift that happened to come right before you provided evidence against Riverside General. Chen was on his feet. Objection. Counsel is testifying. Sustained. Mr. Kessler, ask questions, don't make speeches. Kessler nodded. Ms. Hayes, did General Locke's gift influence your decision to cooperate with federal investigators? No, I cooperated because it was the right thing to do. The right thing. How noble. Kessler's tone dripped sarcasm. Tell me, are you being paid for your testimony today? No? But you did receive compensation. The education fund, a new job in Denver, federal protection. You've benefited significantly from this investigation. I lost my reputation. I've been threatened. My family's been harassed. If this is benefiting, I'd hate to see harm. The courtroom murmured. The judge called for order. Kessler pressed harder, asked about every detail of her documentation, questioned her memory, implied bias, suggested financial motivation, accused her of misinterpreting innocent actions as criminal conspiracy. Morgan held her ground, answered calmly, refused to be rattled. After 4 hours, Kessler yielded. Morgan was excused. She walked out of the courthouse into a wall of cameras and questions she didn't answer. Chen found her in the witness room. You did well, better than well. You were credible, sympathetic. The jury believed you. How do you know? Because I watched them. They were with you, especially when Kessler tried to make the Locke gift sound sinister. That backfired on him. Morgan wanted to believe it, wanted to think her testimony mattered. But as she left the courthouse, she saw Margaret Foster being interviewed by a dozen reporters, heard Foster saying, Ms. Hayes is a troubled individual who saw an opportunity and took it. I hope the jury sees through her manipulation. The trial continued for 2 more weeks. More witnesses, more evidence, expert testimony about hospital standards, financial fraud, patient care protocols. The prosecution built a fortress of documentation. The defense tried to dismantle it piece by piece. Morgan went back to Denver. Back to work. Back to trying to pretend her life was normal while her face was on television every night and her testimony was being analyzed by legal experts on cable news. Summit Ridge's board met to discuss her employment. The CNO called her in. The board has decided to place you on administrative leave pending the trial's conclusion. Paid leave. You'll retain your position and benefits, but we need distance from the situation until it resolves. You're benching me. We're protecting the hospital and you. This arrangement is in everyone's best interest. Morgan didn't argue. What was the point? She'd become toxic, controversial, a liability masked as an asset. She called Chen. They basically fired me without firing me. They're scared. Organizations get scared when employees become public figures. It'll resolve after the verdict. What if the verdict is not guilty? It won't be. The evidence is too strong. You can't guarantee that. No, Chen admitted, but I can tell you that you did everything right. The rest is up to the jury. The jury deliberated for 4 days. 4 days of Morgan sitting in her Denver apartment, watching news coverage, fielding calls from reporters she didn't answer, and wondering if she'd destroyed her life for nothing. On day 4, Chen called. They have a verdict. Morgan flew to Cleveland that night, arrived at the courthouse the next morning to a circus even bigger than before. The jury filed in. 12 faces that had decided her fate along with Foster's. The judge asked the foreman for the verdict. On count 1, conspiracy to defraud Medicare and Medicaid, we find the defendant Margaret Foster guilty. The courtroom erupted. The judge called for order. The foreman continued. On count 2, conspiracy to commit healthcare fraud, guilty. On count 3, wire fraud, guilty. 17 counts. Guilty on 16 of them. Only one count, a technical procedural violation, came back not guilty. Foster collapsed. Her lawyers caught her. The jury had convicted. The evidence had won. Morgan felt nothing. No relief. No satisfaction. Just exhaustion. Outside, reporters swarmed, cameras everywhere, questions shouted from all directions. Ms. Hayes, how do you feel about the verdict? Do you think justice was served? What's next for you? Morgan stood on the courthouse steps, microphones in her face, and realized she had no idea how to answer toward a car waiting at the curb. Morgan toward a car waiting at the curb. Morgan pushed through the reporters, reached the car. Locke opened the door. Get in. We need to talk. She got in. The car pulled away from the chaos, drove through Cleveland streets while Locke watched her with an expression she couldn't read. You did well, he said finally. Foster's going to prison. That's not doing well. That's just winning. It's more than that. Because of you, 17 executives are facing decades in federal prison. Riverside General is being restructured under new leadership. Patient care standards are being enforced. Nurses are getting safe working conditions. You changed the entire system. One hospital. I changed one hospital. You think we're stopping at one? Locke pulled out a tablet, showed her a document marked classified. My team has been using the Riverside case as a template. We've identified 47 hospitals nationwide with similar patterns: fraud, neglect, falsified records. We're opening investigations into all of them. Morgan stared at the document. 47 hospitals, thousands of patients, tens of thousands of staff. And we want you to help, Locke said. Help how? Lead witness training, protocol development, nursing advocacy. You know what to look for, how to document it, how to survive the process of exposing it. We need that expertise. I have a job in Denver, technically. A job where you're on administrative leave because you're too controversial. Locke's smile was sharp. We're offering something better, federal position, Director of Clinical Oversight. You'd work with my team to investigate healthcare fraud nationwide, protect nurses, protect patients, make sure what happened at Riverside doesn't happen anywhere else. Morgan's mind raced. Federal position meant security, meant purpose, meant actually fixing things instead of just surviving them. What about Emma? Full benefits, education covered, housing allowance, security for your family. Locke leaned forward. Morgan, you started something at that airport, something bigger than either of us expected. Now we're asking you to finish it, to take this fight national, to become the voice for every nurse who's been silenced. The car stopped. Morgan looked out the window and realized they were at Riverside General. The hospital was different now. Federal oversight banners, new security, construction vehicles rebuilding the emergency department. Think about it, Locke said. Take a week. Talk to your daughter. But know this. What you did here matters. And what we're planning to do next, with your help, could change American healthcare forever. Morgan got out of the car, stood on the sidewalk looking at the hospital where she'd spent 7 years being invisible, where she'd tried to make a difference and been dismissed, where everything had started. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "We know where you live. We know where Emma goes to school. Drop the federal investigation or face consequences. This is your only warning." Morgan stared at the message, felt ice crystallize in her veins. Then she forwarded it to Director Reeves and typed a message to Locke. "I'm in. When do we start?" The response came 30 seconds later. "Tomorrow." "And Morgan, you're going to need protection. Real protection. Because the people we're going after next make Margaret Foster look like an amateur." Morgan looked at the threatening text again. Then at Riverside General, then at her reflection in the car window. She'd thought the fight was over. Thought justice meant a verdict and prison sentences and walking away clean. She'd been wrong. The fight was just beginning. And somewhere in the country, 47 hospitals full of corrupt executives were about to learn that Morgan Hayes wasn't finished yet. The safe house was in suburban Virginia, 40 minutes from D.C., buried in a neighborhood where every lawn looked identical and every neighbor minded their own business. Morgan arrived at 11 p.m. with one suitcase and a daughter who hadn't stopped asking questions since they'd left Denver 3 hours ago. "Mom, seriously, what's happening?" Emma stood in the living room of the furnished rental, arms crossed. "We just packed up our entire apartment. You quit your job." "I didn't quit. I accepted a federal position." "And now we're in witness protection or something?" "There are armed guards outside." "Armed guards." Morgan set down her suitcase. "The people I'm helping investigate aren't happy about it. These precautions are temporary." "How temporary?" "I don't know." Emma's expression shifted from confusion to fear. "Mom, are we in danger?" Morgan wanted to lie. Wanted to say everything was fine, that the threats were empty, that federal protection was just excessive caution. But Emma was 15 and brilliant and deserved the truth. "Yes," Morgan said, "we might be. Which is why we're here. Which is why there are guards. Which is why you're going to stay with Aunt Rachel in Boston until this situation stabilizes." "What?" "No, I'm not leaving you." "Emma." "I said no. You don't get to send me away because your job got dangerous. We stick together. That's what we do." Morgan pulled her daughter into a hug that felt like surrender. "Okay, but you follow every security protocol. No exceptions. Understand?" Emma nodded against her shoulder. The next morning, Morgan reported to a nondescript office building in Arlington. No signs, no identification, just a street address and a security checkpoint that scanned her credentials 3 times before letting her through. General Locke met her in a conference room on the 4th floor. He wasn't alone. Director Reeves was there. So was Special Agent Ortiz. And 3 people Morgan didn't recognize, 2 women and a man, all wearing the practiced neutral expressions of federal investigators. "Morgan Hayes, meet your team," Locke said. "Dr. Patricia Okonkwo, healthcare fraud specialist. Commander James Riley, Naval Criminal Investigative Service, and Special Agent Michelle Torres, FBI White Collar Crimes Division." Morgan shook hands with people who looked at her like she was either a weapon or a liability, they hadn't decided which yet. "Welcome to the Healthcare Integrity Task Force," Locke continued. "What started as an investigation into one hospital has expanded into something much larger. We now have evidence suggesting a coordinated network of healthcare executives engaged in systematic fraud across multiple states. Shell companies, kickback schemes, falsified compliance reports, patient endangerment on a scale that makes Riverside look small." He pulled up a presentation on the screen. Hospital names, financial flowcharts, networks of executives moving between institutions. Morgan recognized some of the names. Administrators who'd left Riverside years ago, resurfacing at other hospitals with the same patterns of corruption. "This is organized," Dr. Okonkwo said. Her accent was crisp British, her tone precise. "These aren't isolated incidents of individual greed. This is infrastructure. People who know each other, who share strategies, who move money through interconnected systems designed to hide fraud." "How much money?" Morgan asked. "Conservative estimate? 800 million over 5 years. Actual number is probably higher." The room went quiet. Commander Riley leaned forward. We need someone who understands hospital operations from the inside. Someone who can identify the red flags. Someone nurses and staff will trust enough to talk to. That's you. Morgan looked at the faces around the table. You want me to go undercover? Not exactly, Locke said. We want you to do site assessments. Visit these hospitals as part of federal compliance reviews. Interview staff. Observe operations. Document discrepancies. You'll be protected. You'll have backup, but you'll be visible. Visible means vulnerable. Visible means credible. We tried sending auditors. They get stonewalled. Paperwork looks perfect. Staff won't talk. But a nurse? Someone who's been where they are? Someone who survived blowing the whistle and lived to tell about it? Locke's smile was sharp. You're a symbol, Morgan. These people see you as someone who won, someone who made it out. They'll talk to you. And if the executives realize what I'm doing, then we document their attempts to interfere, add obstruction charges to the fraud charges. Either way, we win. Morgan thought about Emma, about the safe house, about the threatening texts that kept coming despite blocking dozens of numbers. When do I start? Tomorrow. First site is in Philadelphia. Metropolitan Grace Hospital. Same ownership structure as Riverside. Similar financial patterns. We think they're running the exact same scheme. Dr. Okonkwo slid a folder across the table. Inside were personnel files, financial records, incident reports. Everything looked clean on paper. Everything always did. Your cover is Federal Compliance Officer conducting routine healthcare quality assessments. You'll have 72 hours inside the hospital. Make them count. Morgan spent the rest of the day in preparation, learning cover protocols, memorizing financial patterns to watch for, practicing questions designed to extract truth from people who'd been trained to hide it. By evening, her brain felt saturated with information and her nerves felt like exposed wires. She called Emma from the office. How's the safe house? Boring. The guards won't let me go anywhere. I'm basically in prison. You're in protection. Same thing. Emma paused. Mom, be careful. Please. Always. The lie tasted familiar. Metropolitan Grace Hospital in Philadelphia looked almost identical to Riverside. Same architecture firm, probably. Same budget-conscious design. Morgan arrived at 7 a.m. with federal credentials and a tablet full of assessment protocols. The CNO met her in the lobby with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Ms. Hayes, we weren't expecting federal compliance this quarter. Surprise assessments are part of the new protocol. Medicare and Medicaid enforcement has been enhanced following recent developments. Morgan let the word hang. Let the CNO connect the dots to Riverside. The woman's smile tightened. Of course, we're happy to cooperate. I'm Janet Holloway, Chief Nursing Officer. I'll be your liaison during the assessment. Translation: I'll be your babysitter, making sure you only see what we want you to see. Morgan spent the morning touring units, reviewing documentation, observing patient care. Everything looked acceptable, good even. Staffing ratios were posted prominently. Equipment appeared functional. Supplies were stocked. But Morgan had learned to look deeper. She noticed the telemetry monitors in the cardiac unit were older models, the kind with documented reliability issues. She noticed nurses moving faster than they should, that particular hurried efficiency that meant understaffing disguised as productivity. She noticed supply cabinets that were full in the toured areas but suspiciously sparse in units they passed quickly. At lunch, Janet tried to escort her to the executive dining room. Morgan declined. I prefer the staff cafeteria. Better sense of hospital culture. Janet's displeasure was visible but professional. Of course. The staff cafeteria was half full. Morgan bought coffee and a sandwich, found a table near a group of nurses, and listened. Third code this week because the crash cart on 4 was missing epinephrine. Told management we need more respiratory therapists, but apparently budget doesn't allow. Patient in 412 developed sepsis because nobody had time to catch the early signs. The conversation stopped when they noticed Morgan. Recognized her maybe, or just clocked her as someone who didn't belong. She stood, approached their table. Mind if I join you? Silence. Suspicion. Then a younger nurse gestured to an empty chair. Sure. Morgan sat, extended her hand. Morgan Hayes, I'm conducting a federal compliance assessment. Recognition flashed across multiple faces. The young nurse who'd invited her to sit recovered first. You're the Riverside whistleblower. I'm a nurse who documented problems and reported them, same as any of you would do. Would we? This from an older nurse, skeptical. Because most of us just keep our heads down and our mouths shut. Safer that way. Is it? Or does it just feel safer until someone dies? The words hung heavy. Morgan watched them register. Saw the moment these nurses decided whether she was safe to talk to or dangerous to be seen with. The young nurse leaned forward. What do you want to know? Morgan pulled out her tablet, started asking questions. Staffing levels, equipment reliability, supply chain consistency, patient outcomes, administrative responsiveness. The answers painted a picture identical to Riverside. Everything fine on paper, everything broken in practice. How many of you have filed incident reports about equipment failures in the past 6 months? Morgan asked. 4 hands went up. How many of those reports resulted in actual repairs? The hands went down. How many of you work mandatory overtime at least twice a week? All hands went up. Morgan documented everything. The nurses spoke carefully at first, then with increasing honesty as they realized she wasn't there to punish them. She was there to listen, to believe them, to do something about it. Janet appeared in the cafeteria doorway, saw Morgan at the nurses' table. Her expression flickered, alarm then forced neutrality. Ms. Hayes, the CEO, would like to meet with you. Morgan stood, thanked the nurses. Followed Janet through corridors that grew progressively more expensive. Artwork on walls, fresh flowers, carpeted floors instead of linoleum. The executive suite. The CEO was a man named Gregory Walsh. Silver hair, custom suit, handshake designed to convey authority. His office was bigger than most patient rooms. Ms. Hayes, what an unexpected pleasure. I followed your case with great interest. Have you? Indeed. Quite brave what you did. Exposing corruption is never easy. Walsh gestured to a chair. Morgan remained standing. I want to assure you that Metropolitan Grace operates with complete transparency. We welcome federal oversight. In fact, we pride ourselves on exceeding compliance standards. Morgan pulled up her tablet. Your incident report shows 0 equipment failures in the past year. Yet I just spoke with 4 nurses who filed reports about malfunctioning defibrillators, broken ventilators, and outdated monitoring equipment. Can you explain the discrepancy? Walsh's smile never wavered. Sometimes staff misunderstand what constitutes a reportable equipment failure versus routine maintenance issues. Your protocols are falsifying federal compliance data, same as Riverside General. The smile died. That's a serious accusation. It's a documented fact. I have testimony from your staff. I have access to your financial records. I know your hospital received federal emergency preparedness grants totaling $3 million in the past 2 years. I know that money was supposed to upgrade equipment and hire staff. I also know your executive compensation increased by 40% in the same period while nursing staff saw 0 raises. Walsh stood. I think this assessment is complete. I'll be filing a formal complaint with your supervisors about your hostile approach and baseless accusations. File whatever you want. I'll be recommending a full federal audit of this facility. Expect investigators within the week. Morgan walked out. Janet was waiting in the hallway, pale and silent. Morgan handed her a business card. When you're ready to tell the truth about what's happening here, call me. Federal whistleblower protections apply to you too. She left the hospital, called Locke from her car. It's the same. Exact same patterns. Falsified reports, diverted funds, endangered patients. We need to move fast before they start destroying evidence. Already on it. Federal warrants are being prepared. We'll execute simultaneous raids on Metropolitan Grace and 6 other hospitals by end of week. Locke paused. Morgan, you need to know. Walsh is connected. His brother is a senator. His wife sits on the board of a major pharmaceutical company. When we move on him, there's going to be political blowback. Let them blow back. The evidence doesn't care about connections. Morgan drove back to Virginia. Spent the evening reviewing documentation from Philadelphia, cross-referencing it with Riverside patterns, building an airtight case. At midnight, Emma found her still working. You're obsessed. I'm thorough. You're obsessed. You barely ate dinner. You haven't slept in how long? Morgan rubbed her eyes. I'm fine. You're not. You haven't been fine since this started. Emma sat on the edge of the desk. I'm proud of you. You know that, right? What you're doing matters, but it's eating you alive. What do you want me to do? Stop? Let these people keep hurting patients? I want you to remember you're human, that you're allowed to rest, that saving the world doesn't require destroying yourself. Morgan pulled her daughter into a hug. When did you get so wise? I had a good teacher. The raids happened Friday morning. 7 hospitals across 4 states. Federal agents, search warrants, evidence seizures. Morgan wasn't present, too visible, too vulnerable, but she watched the news coverage from the Virginia office with her team. Metropolitan Grace's CEO, Gregory Walsh, was escorted out in handcuffs. So were executives from hospitals in Boston, Atlanta, Phoenix, and Seattle. The footage was identical to Riverside. Shocked staff, angry administrators, federal agents carrying boxes of evidence. The press descended immediately. Morgan's phone exploded with interview requests. She ignored them all. By evening, the political backlash Locke had predicted materialized. Senator Walsh, Gregory's brother, held a press conference denouncing federal overreach and politically motivated investigations. He called Morgan a publicity-seeking opportunist and demanded congressional hearings into the task force's methods. Director Reeves appeared on cable news to defend the investigations. These aren't politically motivated. These are evidence-based actions against systematic healthcare fraud. The American public deserves hospitals that prioritize patient care over executive profit. The media framed it as political warfare. Conservative outlets defended the executives. Liberal outlets supported the investigations. Morgan's face was everywhere, her credibility debated by people who'd never met her. Her attorney Chen called. Senator Walsh is dangerous. He's calling for an inspector general investigation into the task force, claiming you're fabricating evidence. This could get messy. Let it get messy. The evidence speaks for itself. Evidence requires context. Juries require trust. If they succeed in destroying your credibility, every case you touch becomes vulnerable. Morgan thought about the nurses at Metropolitan Grace, the patients who'd died, the system that kept grinding people down. Then we make sure they can't destroy my credibility. What do I need to do? Testify. Public hearing. Senate Oversight Committee. They're going to grill you, try to make you look incompetent or corrupt or vindictive. You'll need to be perfect. When? 2 weeks. And Morgan? This is bigger than Riverside. If you falter, every investigation we've opened becomes suspect. No pressure. The hearing was scheduled for a Tuesday. Morgan spent 12 days preparing, mock testimony sessions, hostile questioning drills, document review until she could recite financial patterns in her sleep. Chen brought in political consultants, media trainers, people who understood how to survive congressional theater. You're not just testifying about facts, one consultant said. You're performing credibility. Every word, every expression, every pause. The senators will be performing for cameras. You need to perform humanity. I don't know how to perform humanity. I just know how to tell the truth. Then tell it like someone who isn't trying to take down powerful people. Tell it like someone who just wants patients to be safe. The hearing room was massive, vaulted ceilings, marble columns, hundreds of seats packed with press and observers. The Senate Committee on Healthcare Oversight sat on an elevated platform, 12 senators who'd already decided their positions before Morgan said a word. Senator Walsh sat center-left, expression carved from ice. Morgan was sworn in, sat at a small table facing the senators. Chen sat behind her, close enough to pass notes, far enough to maintain the illusion she was alone. The committee chairman, a moderate Democrat from Minnesota, started with softballs. Asked about her background, her experience, her qualifications. Established her as credible before the attacks began. Then Senator Walsh took his turn. Ms. Hayes, you've made quite a career out of accusing respected healthcare professionals of criminal activity. First Riverside General, now 7 additional hospitals. Do you see a pattern in your behavior? Yes, a pattern of documented fraud and patient endangerment? or a pattern of seeking attention and advancement through inflammatory accusations? I didn't seek attention. I provided evidence to federal investigators conducting legitimate inquiries. Evidence you conveniently compiled over years while working at Riverside, almost like you were planning this. I compiled evidence because I hoped someone would eventually care enough to fix the problems I was seeing. Walsh pulled out a document. According to employment records, you applied for promotions at Riverside 17 times in 7 years. Denied every time. That must have created significant resentment. It created frustration with a system that didn't value nursing input. Or it created a motive for revenge. You couldn't advance through legitimate channels, so you destroyed the institution that rejected you. Morgan kept her voice level. 17 executives have been convicted or pleaded guilty to federal crimes. That's not revenge. That's justice. Justice. Walsh's smile was cold. Let's talk about your relationship with General Locke. He gave you $15,000, arranged a job for you in Denver, offered you a federal position. Some might call that quid pro quo. Some might recognize gratitude from a patient whose life I saved. Did you save his life, or did you see an opportunity when a high-ranking military official collapsed in front of you? I saw a patient in cardiac arrest, Shatin. I performed CPR. I didn't know who he was until hours later. How convenient that the patient turned out to be investigating your hospital. What are the odds? I don't know, but they're irrelevant to the evidence of fraud. Walsh leaned forward. Ms. Hayes, isn't it true that you've personally profited from these investigations? Federal position? Protected status? Media attention? Book deals? I haven't accepted any book deals, but you've been offered them. Significant offers. 5 figures, 6 figures. Money that depends on you remaining in the public eye as a crusader against corruption. I'm not a crusader. I'm a nurse who documented problems. A nurse who's now a federal agent targeting institutions across the country. How many hospitals are you investigating currently? Chen passed her a note. Don't answer. Ongoing investigations. I can't comment on ongoing investigations. How convenient. Can't comment on the scope of your witch hunt. Walsh shuffled papers. Let's talk about Metropolitan Grace. You spent less than 8 hours at that facility before recommending federal raids. 8 hours. How can you possibly assess an entire hospital in 8 hours? I assess patterns consistent with documented fraud. Spoke with staff who confirmed systematic issues. Cross-referenced their accounts with financial data showing fund diversion. Staff who you led with suggestive questions. Staff who knew your history and might have told you what they thought you wanted to hear. Staff who were terrified of retaliation and only spoke because they trusted me to protect them. Or staff who saw an opportunity to blame their employers for normal hospital challenges. The questioning continued for 3 hours. Senator Walsh attacked every aspect of Morgan's credibility, her employment history, her relationships, her motivations, her methods. Other senators defended her or piled on depending on their political alignment. The whole thing was theater, facts twisted into weapons, truth secondary to performance. Morgan held her ground, answered calmly, refused to be provoked into anger or defensiveness. By the time the chairman called for a break, she felt like she'd been through psychological warfare. Chen handed her water in the hallway. You're doing well. Stay steady. They're trying to break you. I know. Walsh has 2 more rounds of questions. He's going to get worse. Let him. The afternoon session brought new attacks. Senator Walsh introduced expert witnesses, healthcare executives from other institutions who testified about the complexities of hospital budgeting, the challenges of compliance, the unrealistic expectations of federal oversight. They painted the investigated executives as victims of overzealous prosecution. Then Walsh called a surprise witness, Dr. Benjamin Carver. Morgan's former supervisor walked into the hearing room looking professional and wounded. He was sworn in, took his seat, looked directly at Morgan with an expression of profound disappointment. Dr. Carver, you supervised Miss Hayes at Riverside General for 7 years. Can you speak to her character and competence? Carver sighed, a performance of reluctant honesty. Morgan was a dedicated nurse, I won't dispute that, but she had difficulty accepting authority. Difficulty understanding that her perspective, while valuable, wasn't always complete. She would submit protocols and proposals without understanding the budgetary constraints we faced. When they were rejected, she took it personally. Would you characterize her as someone prone to seeing malice in normal administrative decisions? I would characterize her as someone who believed her way was the only right way. That kind of rigidity can lead to misinterpretation. Did you ever witness her fabricating documentation? Objection! Chen was on his feet. The witness is testifying to criminal conduct without evidence. The chairman sustained. Walsh rephrased. Did you ever have concerns about the accuracy of Ms. Hayes' reporting? I had concerns about her interpretation of events. She would see a delayed equipment repair and assume malice rather than normal maintenance scheduling. She would see budget reallocation and assume fraud rather than strategic resource management. Morgan watched her former supervisor lie under oath, watched him twist 7 years of her work into the portrait of a paranoid troublemaker, watched senators nod like his testimony confirmed their suspicions. When Walsh finished, another senator, a Democrat from California, took her turn with Carver. Dr. Carver, you were convicted of healthcare fraud 3 weeks ago. Is that correct? Carver's composure cracked. I pleaded guilty to a single count. The other charges were dropped. You pleaded guilty to conspiracy to defraud Medicare. You're currently awaiting sentencing. You're facing up to 10 years in federal prison. Is that correct? Yes. And you expect this committee to take seriously your assessment of Ms. Hayes' credibility when you've admitted to being a criminal. My mistakes don't invalidate my observations about your mistakes are that you committed fraud, that you endangered patients, that you did exactly what Ms. Hayes accused you of doing. That's not a mistake. That's a crime. The senator turned to Morgan. Ms. Hayes, do you have a response to Dr. Carver's testimony? Morgan looked at Carver, saw desperation in his eyes, saw a man trying to drag her down as his world collapsed. Dr. Carver is doing what convicted criminals often do, trying to shift blame to the person who exposed them. His testimony is self-serving and irrelevant to the evidence. The financial records speak for themselves. The patient outcomes speak for themselves. His opinion of my character doesn't change the fact that he pleaded guilty to federal crimes. The hearing continued into evening. More witnesses, more questions, more political posturing. By the time the chairman gavelled the session closed, Morgan could barely stand. Chen walked her to a waiting car. You survived. That's what matters. Did I win? You didn't lose. In congressional hearings, that's winning. Morgan returned to Virginia, exhausted and hollowed out. Emma met her at the door with takeout and a hug. You were amazing. I watched the whole thing. You destroyed Carver. I just told the truth. You made him look like the criminal he is. Emma pulled her inside. Come on, food, then sleep. You look like death. Morgan ate, showered, tried to sleep, couldn't. Her mind replayed the hearing, Walsh's attacks, Carver's lies, the senators who'd already decided she was either a hero or a menace, depending on their party affiliation. At 2 a.m., her phone buzzed. Lock. Turn on the news, Channel 7. Morgan found the remote, turned on the television. Found Channel 7 running breaking news coverage. Federal raids at 17 additional hospitals tonight following new evidence provided by the Healthcare Integrity Task Force. Sources say these raids are connected to testimony heard today in Senate oversight hearings. The footage showed hospitals in Dallas, Minneapolis, Portland, Miami. Federal agents executing warrants, executives being detained. The operation was massive, coordinated across time zones, simultaneous strikes designed to prevent evidence destruction. Morgan's phone rang again. Lock. We just moved on the entire network, shell companies, kickback schemes, money laundering. We've been building this for weeks. Your hearing testimony gave us the political cover to execute. Senator Walsh can scream about overreach all he wants. We have 17 more hospitals worth of evidence now. Morgan watched the raids unfold on television. Watched her fight become something bigger than she'd ever imagined. How many people are we talking about? 63 executives arrested tonight. Probably more as we dig deeper. This is the largest healthcare fraud operation in U.S. history. And it started because you refused to let one general die on an airport floor. Morgan ended the call. Sat in darkness watching news coverage. Thought about the chain of events that had led here. A briefcase hitting the floor. A choice to help instead of walk away. 7 years of documentation finally mattering. Emma appeared in the doorway, Can't sleep? Too much happening. Emma sat beside her. They watched the news together in silence, watched Morgan's face appear on screen with chyrons that read, "Whistleblower's testimony triggers nationwide raids." "You're famous," Emma said. "I'm infamous. You're a hero." Morgan thought about the nurses she'd met, the patients who'd died, the system that had tried to silence her. "I'm just someone who refused to be quiet." Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Morgan almost didn't check it, had learned that unknown numbers meant threats or reporters or problems. But something made her look. "You've made powerful enemies, but you've also made powerful allies. Check your email." A friend, Morgan, opened her email, found a message from an encrypted address. No subject line, just an attachment. She downloaded it, opened it, stared at the document that appeared on her screen. It was a list, names, hundreds of them, healthcare executives, board members, politicians, all connected to the fraud network, all receiving payments through shell companies, all part of a conspiracy that spanned decades and touched hospitals in 47 states. And at the top of the list, in bold letters, Senator Richard Walsh. Morgan's hands shook. This was it, the final piece, the evidence that would bring down not just corrupt executives, but the political infrastructure that protected them. She forwarded the email to Locke, to Reeves, to Chen, to every investigator she trusted. Then she sat back and waited for the explosion. It came at dawn. Federal agents arrived at Senator Walsh's home with arrest warrants. The footage was on every channel by 7 a.m. A sitting senator being taken into custody for conspiracy, bribery, and obstruction of justice. The political fallout was instantaneous. Congressional allies abandoned Walsh. His brother Gregory cut a plea deal and agreed to testify. The conspiracy collapsed like a house of cards, each person racing to betray the others in exchange for reduced sentences. Morgan watched it unfold from the Virginia safe house, watched powerful people who'd seemed untouchable get cuffed and perp-walked and processed like common criminals. Her phone wouldn't stop ringing. Reporters, advocates, hospital administrators wanting to cooperate before they got raided, nurses wanting to thank her, patients wanting to share their stories. Emma made her turn off the phone. "You need a break. An actual break. Not sleep for 4 hours, then back to work. A real break. There's too much happening. There's always going to be too much happening. You can't save everyone. You can't fix everything. You're allowed to rest." Morgan wanted to argue, wanted to say there were still hospitals to investigate, still executives to expose, still patients who needed protecting. But Emma was right. She was running on fumes and fury and the kind of obsession that destroyed people from the inside. "Okay," Morgan said. "1 week. We'll go somewhere quiet, somewhere without news or phones or federal investigations." Emma's smile was brilliant. "Thank you. Where should we go?" Before Morgan could answer, her phone rang. She'd turned it off, but Chen had emergency override access. "Morgan, you need to see this." "See what?" "Check the news, any channel, now." Morgan turned on the television. Every channel was showing the same footage. A press conference. General Adrian Locke standing at a podium, flanked by Director Reeves and the Attorney General. "Pleased to announce that due to the exceptional work of the Healthcare Integrity Task Force, we have successfully dismantled the largest healthcare fraud conspiracy in American history. 63 individuals have been arrested. 17 have already pleaded guilty. We have recovered over $800 million in stolen funds, which will be returned to Medicare and Medicaid programs and used to improve patient care at the affected facilities." The Attorney General took the microphone. "This investigation represents federal law enforcement at its best, but it wouldn't have been possible without the courage of one person who refused to stay silent when she witnessed corruption. Nurse Morgan Hayes saw fraud and patient endangerment. She documented it. She reported it. And when powerful people tried to destroy her credibility, she stood firm. Because of her, thousands of patients will receive better care. Hundreds of nurses will work in safer conditions, and corrupt executives will face justice." Locke returned to the microphone. "Effective immediately, the Healthcare Integrity Task Force will become a permanent division within the Department of Health and Human Services. Director of Clinical Oversight Morgan Hayes will lead nursing advocacy and protocol development, working with hospitals nationwide to ensure transparent, patient-centered care. Morgan stared at the television, watched her name appear on screen, watched her position become permanent, watched everything she'd fought for crystallize into institutional reality. Emma hugged her. "Mom, you did it. You actually did it." Morgan's phone exploded with messages. Congratulations, interview requests, threats from people who still thought she was the villain, support from nurses across the country who'd been waiting for someone to fight back. She turned off the phone again. That week off, Morgan said. Let's make it 2 weeks. Really? Really? We've earned it. They packed, made plans for somewhere quiet. Maybe Maine, maybe mountains, somewhere without cell service or news coverage or reminders of the fight. Somewhere Morgan could remember who she was before she became a symbol. The car was packed. Emma was waiting. Morgan took one last look at the safe house that had sheltered them through the worst of it. Her phone buzzed. One last message before she powered it down completely. It was from Locke. The work isn't done. It's never done. But you've changed the game. Now come change the system. When you're ready, we'll be waiting. Morgan looked at the message, thought about 47 hospitals, about nurses working impossible shifts, about patients trusting a system that kept betraying them. She thought about her daughter, brilliant and brave and deserving of a mother who could be present instead of perpetually at war. She thought about the choice between fixing everything and preserving herself. Then she thought about something else, something that had been nagging at her since the raids. A detail in the financial documents, a pattern she'd noticed but hadn't had time to investigate. Money flowing from the hospital network into accounts she couldn't trace, amounts too large to be individual kickbacks. A destination that made no sense unless… Morgan opened her laptop, pulled up the encrypted files one more time, traced the money backward, found shell companies, found routing numbers, found transfers that led to… Her blood went cold. The money was going to a medical supply company, a legitimate company that supplied equipment to hundreds of hospitals nationwide. A company that had provided the defective defibrillators, the malfunctioning ventilators, the equipment that failed when patients needed it most. A company that was owned by a holding group whose board included 3 senators, 2 former FDA officials, and the previous Surgeon General. This wasn't just fraud. This was systematic patient endangerment enabled at the highest levels of government. This was medical equipment deliberately compromised to create profit opportunities. This was murder disguised as commerce. Morgan stared at the screen, at proof that everything she'd uncovered was just the surface, that the corruption went deeper than anyone had imagined, that the fight she thought she'd won was actually just beginning. Emma called from the car. "Mom, we're losing daylight. You coming?" Morgan looked at her laptop, at the evidence that could destroy careers and save lives and consume whatever remained of her peace. She looked at her daughter waiting in the car. She looked at the choice she had to make. And in that moment, Morgan Hayes realized that some fights don't end. They just evolve. They grow. They demand everything you have and then ask for more. Her phone rang. Unknown number. Against every instinct, she answered. A woman's voice, trembling, scared. "Ms. Hayes? My name is Dr. Sarah Kim. I work at Mercy General in Sacramento. I've been documenting equipment failures for 2 years. Patients have died. I have proof. But I'm terrified to come forward. They'll destroy me the way they tried to destroy you. I don't know what to do." Morgan closed her eyes, felt the weight of it settle over her like armor. "Dr. Kim," she said quietly, "tell me everything." Morgan listened to Dr. Sarah Kim's voice crack over the phone as Emma waited in the car outside, backpack ready for a vacation that wasn't going to happen. The story was familiar. Equipment failures, patient deaths, administrators who looked the other way. But something in Sarah's desperation felt different, sharper, more immediate. "How many patients?" Morgan asked. 11 in the past 18 months, all preventable. All because defibrillators failed during codes or ventilators malfunctioned during critical care. Sarah's breath hitched. "I documented everything, serial numbers, failure patterns, purchase orders. The equipment all came from the same supplier, Meditech Solutions. And when I tried to report it, my department head told me equipment fails sometimes, and I should stop looking for conspiracies." Meditech Solutions. The name Morgan had just traced in the financial documents. The company owned by the holding group with senators on its board. Sarah, listen to me carefully. Do not discuss this with anyone at your hospital. Do not access those files from your work computer. Do not give any indication you're talking to federal investigators. Can you do that? Yes. But Ms. Hayes, I'm scared. What if they know I called you? What if they don't know? Not yet. I'm going to connect you with people who can protect you. But right now, I need you to act normal. Go to work. Do your job. Wait for contact. Understand? Okay, thank you. Thank you for believing me. Morgan ended the call and immediately dialed Locke. He answered on the first ring. Tell me you're calling to say you're taking that vacation. I found something, Meditech Solutions, the medical supply company that's been providing defective equipment to the hospitals in our investigation. They're owned by a holding group with serious political connections. 3 senators, former FDA officials. And I just got a call from a doctor in Sacramento whose patients are dying because Meditech defibrillators keep failing. Silence. Then, send me everything. I'll get a team to Sacramento within the hour. Locke, if this goes where I think it goes, if we can prove deliberate equipment compromise, this is bigger than fraud. This is mass negligence, maybe even criminally negligent homicide. I know, which is why we need to move carefully. These aren't hospital executives we're talking about anymore. These are people with the power to shut down investigations, to bury evidence, to destroy anyone who threatens them. Then we don't give them time to bury anything. We move fast. Morgan heard Locke smile through the phone. I'll coordinate with FBI and DOJ, but Morgan, you need to step back on this one. You're too visible, too vulnerable. Let us handle Sacramento. No. Morgan, that doctor called me because she trusted me, because she saw what I did and believed I'd help. If I hand her off to federal agents she's never met, she'll panic, she'll retract. We'll lose her. I need to go to Sacramento. Absolutely not. You've got a target on your back from the last investigation. You wade into this one, you're asking to get killed. Then give me protection, but I'm going. Emma appeared in the doorway, arms crossed. Mom, who are you going to Sacramento to help? Morgan covered the phone. A doctor who needs support. It's complicated. It's always complicated, and you're always going. Emma's voice was steady, but her eyes weren't. You promised 2 weeks, no work, just us. Morgan felt the fracture widening between the person she was and the person this fight demanded she become. Emma, I know, but someone's life might depend on... Someone's life always depends on it. There's always another hospital, another whistleblower, another investigation. Emma's composure cracked. When do I get to depend on you? The words hit like a physical blow. Morgan lowered the phone, Locke's voice still talking on the other end. Looked at her daughter, 15 years old, brilliant and brave, and tired of being secondary to a crusade. You're right, Morgan said quietly. You're absolutely right. She raised the phone. Locke, I'm sending you Dr. Kim's contact information and everything I have on Meditech. Coordinate with your team. I'll be available by phone for consultation, but I'm taking 2 weeks, starting now. Morgan, are you sure? This is the breakthrough we've been... I'm sure. My daughter needs her mother more than the investigation needs me. She ended the call before he could argue, forwarded Sarah Kim's information and the Meditech files to Locke and Director Reeves, then powered down her laptop and looked at Emma. 2 weeks. I promise. For real this time. Emma's smile was tentative, like she didn't quite believe it. Where are we going? Somewhere with no cell service, no news, no federal investigations. You pick. They drove north, found a cabin in the White Mountains of New Hampshire, isolated, quiet, exactly what Morgan needed to remember how to breathe without feeling like she was abandoning someone. The first 3 days were difficult. Morgan kept reaching for her phone, checking news, wondering about Sacramento. Emma would give her a look and Morgan would put the phone away and try to be present. By day 4, something shifted. Morgan woke up without the immediate urge to check case files. Made breakfast with Emma. Hiked. Read books that weren't about healthcare policy. Remembered what it felt like to exist without the weight of institutional corruption pressing down on her. On day 6, Emma brought it up over dinner. Do you regret it? Everything that happened? Which part? All of it. Saving General Locke, blowing the whistle, becoming this person who can't take a vacation without doctors calling for help. Morgan thought about it, really thought. I regret the cost. What it did to our normal life, what it's still doing. But the actual choice? Saving him? Speaking up? No. I'd make the same choice again. Even knowing what it would cost? Especially knowing what it would cost. Because the alternative was pretending I didn't see people suffering, and I can't do that. Emma nodded slowly. I know, that's what makes you you. I just wish the world didn't punish people for caring. Me too. On day 9, Morgan's phone rang, the emergency line only Locke and her lawyer had access to. She answered reluctantly. I'm on vacation. I know, I'm sorry, but you need to hear this. Locke's voice was strange, excited and grim at once. Dr. Kim's documentation was solid. We raided Meditech's headquarters yesterday. Found evidence of deliberate equipment sabotage. They were manufacturing defibrillators with components they knew had a 30% failure rate. Ventilators with software bugs that caused random shutdowns. They knew. They sold them anyway. And when hospitals reported failures, Meditech would send replacement units with the same defects. Morgan's grip tightened on the phone. How many deaths? Preliminary count? Over 200 across 40 hospitals in 3 years. Morgan, this is mass negligent homicide. The executives knew their equipment was killing people and they kept selling it because fixing the problems would have cost more than the lawsuits. The board members, the senators. We're building the case now. Emails, financial records, meeting notes where they explicitly discuss the cost-benefit analysis of paying wrongful death settlements versus issuing a recall. Locke paused. This is going to detonate what's left of the political protection around healthcare fraud, but we need Dr. Kim to testify. She's terrified. Talking about recanting. We need someone she trusts to convince her. Morgan looked at Emma across the cabin, saw her daughter tense, recognizing the shape of what was coming. Locke, I'm in the middle of the mountains with my daughter. I can't just... Emma stood up, walked over, took the phone from Morgan's hand. General Locke? This is Emma Hayes. My mom's going to Sacramento because that's who she is. But when this is over, when Dr. Kim is safe and the testimony is given and the bad guys are arrested, my mom is coming home. And she's going to be present, fully present, not half listening while thinking about the next investigation. Deal? Morgan heard Locke's surprised laugh through the speaker. Deal. Put your mother back on. Emma handed the phone back. Go save someone, but come back to me. Morgan flew to Sacramento the next morning. Locke had arranged protection. 2 federal marshals who looked capable of stopping bullets with their bare hands. They picked her up at the airport and drove to a safe house where Dr. Sarah Kim was waiting. Sarah was younger than Morgan expected. Maybe 30, dark circles under her eyes, hands that wouldn't stop shaking. She stood when Morgan entered, recognition and relief flooding her face. You came. Of course I came. Tell me what's happening. Sarah broke down. The stress of documentation. The isolation of knowing something terrible while everyone around her acted like it was normal. The fear that speaking up would destroy her career before it even started. Morgan sat beside her. I know exactly what you're feeling. The fear, the doubt, the voice that says maybe you're wrong, maybe you're overreacting, maybe it's not as bad as it seems. How did you get past it? I didn't. I'm still scared, still doubting, still wondering if I'm doing the right thing. Morgan took Sarah's hand. But here's what I learned. The fear doesn't go away when you speak up. It just becomes something different. It becomes the fear that you'll fail the people counting on you, that the evidence won't be enough, that the system will protect the guilty and punish the honest. But that fear, that's worth carrying, because at least you're fighting instead of pretending. Sarah nodded, tears streaming. What if I can't do it? What if I freeze on the witness stand? Then you'll freeze, and then you'll unfreeze, and you'll keep going. Because 200 people died, Sarah. 200 families who deserved better. You're their voice now. You're the only person who can make their deaths mean something. Will you be there? During the testimony? Morgan thought about Emma, about promises made and broken, and the cost of heroism nobody talked about. Yes, I'll be there. The federal case moved with terrifying speed. Meditech's executives were arrested within 48 hours of the raid. The board members, including the 3 senators, were named as co-conspirators. Evidence was overwhelming. Emails discussing the defect rates, financial models calculating acceptable death counts versus recall costs, meeting minutes where executives explicitly decided profit mattered more than lives. The media frenzy was worse than Riverside. National coverage, international outrage, congressional hearings. Morgan's face was everywhere again, this time alongside Sarah Kim's. They became symbols, nurses and doctors fighting a system that valued money over patients. The threats intensified. Morgan's security detail tripled. Emma was moved to a different safe house with armed protection. The people they were exposing weren't small-time hospital executives anymore. These were individuals with billions of dollars and political power and connections to intelligence agencies. Chen called daily with updates and warnings. They're going after both of you. Character assassination, leaked medical records, fabricated scandals. Be prepared for anything. The trial started on a Monday. Federal courthouse in Sacramento. Security so tight it felt like a military installation. Morgan sat in the gallery with Sarah, watching prosecutors lay out a case so damning it felt surreal. Equipment designed to fail. Patients who died preventable deaths. Executives who chose profit over every principle of medical ethics. Sarah testified on day 3. She was terrified, hands shaking, voice barely audible. But she told the truth, showed the documentation, connected the deaths to the equipment failures, to the deliberate manufacturing defects. The jury listened in horrified silence. Defense tried to break her, questioned her expertise, suggested she'd misinterpreted data, implied she was seeking attention. Sarah held firm, and when she faltered, when the defense attorney's questions became too aggressive and Sarah started to crack, Morgan stood up in the gallery. Objection. Counsel is badgering the witness. The judge looked startled. Ms. Hayes, you're not an attorney in this proceeding. No, Your Honor, but I am someone who's been exactly where Dr. Kim is right now. Being attacked for telling the truth, being made to feel small for being brave. And I'm asking this court to remember that the person on that stand isn't the one who killed 200 patients. She's the one trying to get them justice. The judge should have held her in contempt, should have had her removed. Instead, he looked at Sarah's face, at the jury's expressions, at the defense attorney who'd gone too far. Sustained. Counsel, rephrase your question or move on. Sarah finished her testimony. The prosecution rested. The defense presented their case, technical experts claiming the failure rates were within industry standards, executives testifying they'd acted in good faith, character witnesses painting the accused as dedicated professionals. The jury deliberated for 6 days. Morgan spent those days in Sacramento with Sarah, waiting. They didn't talk about the trial, didn't speculate about verdicts, just existed in the liminal space between fighting and resolution. On day 6, the jury returned. Guilty. On every count. All 17 defendants convicted of conspiracy, negligent homicide, fraud, and racketeering. The courtroom erupted. Families of victims sobbed. Defense attorneys scrambled. And Morgan sat perfectly still, feeling the weight of 200 deaths finally acknowledged. The sentencing came 2 weeks later. The executives received sentences ranging from 15 to 40 years. The senators were expelled from Congress pending their own criminal proceedings. Meditech Solutions was dissolved, its assets seized to fund victim compensation. The FDA announced emergency recalls of every piece of equipment the company had manufactured in the past 5 years. And in a rare move, the judge made a statement from the bench. This case represents a fundamental betrayal of trust between medical institutions and the patients they serve. It took extraordinary courage for Dr. Sarah Kim and others to expose this conspiracy. It took even more courage for Nurse Morgan Hayes to create an environment where whistleblowers felt safe coming forward. This court commends their bravery and hopes their example inspires others to speak truth to power, regardless of cost. Morgan flew back to Virginia that night. Emma was waiting at the safe house, having watched the sentencing on television. She hugged Morgan so hard it hurt. "It's over," Emma said. "Please tell me it's over. It's over. Can we go home now?" Actual home, not safe houses? Morgan thought about Cleveland, about the apartment they'd left behind, about a life that felt impossibly distant. We can go anywhere. Where do you want home to be? Emma pulled back, studying her mother's face. Wherever you are, but I need you to be actually there. Not physically present, but mentally somewhere else. Actually there. I will be, I promise. They moved to Boston. Emma wanted to be near the pre-med program at Case Western. Morgan accepted a position at Massachusetts General Hospital, not as a floor nurse, not even as a clinical director, but as the director of clinical ethics and patient safety. Her job was to create systems that protected whistleblowers, to train staff on identifying fraud, to ensure what happened at Riverside and Metropolitan Grace and 47 other hospitals never happened again. It was quieter work, less dramatic, but Morgan found satisfaction in the institutional change, writing policies that protected nurses, developing reporting mechanisms that couldn't be ignored, training new advocates to recognize and document corruption. 6 months after the Meditech trial, Morgan was invited to testify before Congress again, not as a defendant of federal overreach, but as an expert witness on healthcare reform. She sat before the same committee that had tried to destroy her credibility, but this time the questions were different. Ms. Hayes, based on your experience, what systemic changes would most effectively prevent healthcare fraud and protect patients? Morgan had prepared remarks, bullet points about oversight and transparency and accountability. But sitting there, looking at the senators who'd once treated her like a criminal, she set aside the script. The most effective change would be believing nurses. We're the ones at the bedside. We see the equipment failures. We know when staffing is unsafe. We watch patients suffer from preventable complications. But the system treats us like we're disposable, like our observations don't matter, like speaking up is insubordination instead of advocacy. Morgan leaned forward. You want to prevent fraud? Listen to the people closest to patients. Protect them when they report problems. Create mechanisms where their voices can't be dismissed or buried or punished. Because I guarantee you right now, there's a nurse somewhere documenting corruption, terrified to come forward because she's seen what happened to people like me. That nurse shouldn't have to risk everything to do the right thing. The system should make the right thing possible. The committee room was silent. Then one senator, the Democrat from California who'd defended Morgan during the Walsh hearing, started clapping. Others joined. Within seconds, the entire gallery was applauding. The hearing resulted in bipartisan legislation, the Healthcare Integrity and Patient Safety Act. It mandated federal whistleblower protections for all healthcare workers, created independent oversight boards, required transparent financial reporting from hospitals receiving federal funds, and established criminal penalties for executives who retaliated against employees reporting fraud. The bill passed unanimously, was signed into law 6 months later, and Morgan was invited to the signing ceremony at the White House, standing behind the president as he used 12 pens to sign the legislation that wouldn't have existed without her refusal to stay silent. Emma was there too, along with Sarah Kim and a dozen other nurses who'd blown whistles at their own institutions. They stood together as the president spoke about accountability and courage and the people who'd sacrificed their comfort to demand better. After the ceremony, General Locke pulled Morgan aside. How does it feel, changing the entire healthcare system? I didn't change it. I just made enough noise that people couldn't ignore the problems anymore. That's what changing systems looks like. One person refusing to accept the status quo. Locke handed her an envelope. This is for you. Don't open it until you're home. That evening, back in Boston, Morgan opened the envelope. Inside was a letter on official Department of Defense letterhead. Dear Nurse Hayes, in recognition of your extraordinary service to the healthcare integrity of this nation, you are hereby awarded the Defense Distinguished Public Service Medal, the highest honor the Department of Defense can bestow upon a civilian. Your actions at Cleveland Hopkins Airport on February 27th saved my life. Your actions in the months and years that followed saved thousands of others. You exemplify the highest ideals of nursing, courage, compassion, and an unwavering commitment to patient welfare. The military thanks you. The nation thanks you. And I, personally, will spend the rest of my career ensuring that the systems you helped reform stay reformed. With deepest gratitude and respect, General Adrian Locke Morgan read the letter twice, felt the weight of everything that had happened since that moment at the airport. The lives saved, the lives lost, the institutions reformed, the price she'd paid and the victories she'd won. Emma found her crying on the couch. "Mom, what's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong. Everything's right. For the first time in years, everything feels right." The award ceremony was held at the Pentagon 3 months later. Morgan wore her dress uniform, the one she'd kept from her brief military nursing stint 20 years ago, before Emma was born, before Cleveland, before everything. She stood at attention as General Locke pinned the medal to her chest and read the citation. For exceptionally distinguished service in a position of great responsibility. Through her extraordinary courage and tireless advocacy, Nurse Morgan Hayes exposed systematic healthcare fraud affecting hundreds of thousands of patients, reformed federal oversight mechanisms, and created lasting institutional change that will protect future generations. Her actions exemplify the highest standards of nursing ethics and public service. The audience, filled with military brass, healthcare administrators, and every nurse who'd ever worked with Morgan, rose in standing ovation. Emma was in the front row, crying and clapping, and so obviously proud that Morgan had to look away to keep her own composure. After the ceremony, during the reception, nurses approached Morgan with stories. Stories about reporting problems and being believed, about hospitals creating transparent reporting systems, about executives being held accountable, about patients receiving better care because the system had changed. "You started something," one nurse said, "something that's spreading. Hospitals are scared now, scared of being the next Riverside, so they're actually fixing problems instead of hiding them." Another nurse, older, with the tired eyes of someone who'd fought too many losing battles, gripped Morgan's hand. "I've been nursing for 37 years. I've watched good people give up, burn out, walk away because the system was too broken to fight. You didn't walk away. You made the system change. Thank you." Morgan returned to Boston that night, exhausted and fulfilled in ways she'd never expected. The fight wasn't over. It would never be fully over. There would always be another hospital, another corrupt executive, another nurse who needed support to speak up. But the landscape had shifted. The mechanisms existed now. The protections were real. 3 years after that day at the airport, Morgan stood in her office at Massachusetts General, walls covered with thank you letters from nurses, patient safety awards, photographs of every person she'd helped protect, and reflected on the journey. Her phone rang. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer, old habits dying hard. But something made her pick up. "Ms. Hayes? My name is Marcus Rodriguez. I'm a physician assistant in Phoenix. I've been documenting medication diversion in my hospital for 6 months. People are getting diluted pain medications because someone's stealing the real doses. Patients are suffering. I want to report it, but I'm terrified. I saw what you went through. I don't know if I'm strong enough." Morgan sat down, felt the familiar weight settling over her shoulders. But this time, it didn't feel like a burden. It felt like purpose. "Marcus, tell me everything. And then I'm going to tell you something important. You don't have to be strong enough alone. That's what we built all this for. So people like you wouldn't have to fight the way I did. You report it, we protect you. That's the promise. That's the system we created. Will it work? I don't know, but we're going to find out together." Morgan spent the next hour on the phone with Marcus, walking him through the reporting process, connecting him with federal investigators, arranging protection. By the time she finished, it was dark outside. Emma was waiting at home with dinner and probably homework questions and the normal rhythms of a life Morgan had almost lost. But first, Morgan did one more thing. She opened her laptop and started writing. Not documentation this time, not evidence. A letter. To every nurse who's ever seen something wrong and been too scared to speak up. I understand your fear. I lived it. The terror of losing your job. The isolation of being the only one willing to name the problem. The exhaustion of fighting systems designed to silence you. But I also understand something else now. You're not alone. The system has changed. Not perfectly. Not completely. But enough that your voice matters now in ways it didn't before. When you see fraud, report it. When you witness patient endangerment, document it. When administrators try to silence you, stand firm, because the infrastructure exists now to protect you. The laws are real. The oversight is meaningful, The consequences for retaliation are severe. You don't have to be a hero. You don't have to sacrifice everything. You just have to tell the truth and trust that the systems we built will catch you when you fall. I'll be here. We'll all be here. Every nurse who's fought this fight before you, every investigator who believes in accountability, every patient who deserves better, speak up. We're listening. With solidarity and hope, Morgan Hayes, RN Director of Clinical Ethics and Patient Safety, Massachusetts General Hospital. She posted the letter on the National Nursing Advocacy website she'd helped create. Within an hour, it had been shared 3,000 times. Within a day, 15,000. Within a week, it was being printed and posted in hospital break rooms across the country. And the calls started coming. Nurses, doctors, technicians, people who'd been documenting problems, waiting for permission to speak. Morgan coordinated with federal task forces, connected whistleblowers with investigators, watched the dominoes fall as more corruption was exposed, more executives were arrested, more institutions were reformed. The work was endless, but it was no longer lonely. 5 years after saving General Locke's life, Morgan was invited to speak at a national nursing conference. 10,000 nurses packed an auditorium to hear her address. She stood at the podium, looking at faces from every corner of the country, and felt the weight of how far they'd all come. I'm often asked if I regret what happened, Morgan began. If I wish I'd just gotten on that plane and gone to Denver and let someone else save General Locke. If I wish I'd stayed quiet about Riverside. The auditorium was silent. The truth is, I do regret some things. I regret the time I lost with my daughter while fighting battles that consumed me. I regret the nurses who lost their jobs before the protections existed. I regret every patient who died because the system failed them before we could fix it. She paused, letting the honesty land. But I don't regret the choice to act. Because that choice, that single decision to help a stranger instead of walking past, started something we couldn't have imagined. It exposed corruption that endangered thousands. It created protections that empower millions. It proved that one person refusing to be silent can change entire systems. Morgan looked at Emma, sitting in the front row, now 18 and headed to medical school with a full scholarship from the Nursing Advocacy Fund that bore Morgan's name. You're going to face impossible choices in your careers, moments where staying quiet is easier than speaking up, where protecting yourself feels smarter than protecting patients, where the cost of doing the right thing seems too high to pay. The nurses leaned forward, hanging on every word. When those moments come, remember this: you are not alone. The system we built together will catch you. The laws we fought for will protect you. The community we've created will support you. Your voice matters. Your observations are valid. Your courage can change everything. Morgan's voice strengthened, filled with conviction earned through scars. They tried to make me small, tried to silence me with threats and intimidation and public humiliation, tried to convince me I was just a floor nurse who didn't understand the complexity of hospital operations. But here's what they didn't understand. Nursing isn't about complexity. It's about seeing people suffer and refusing to look away. It's about documentation and advocacy and the stubborn insistence that patients deserve better. The applause started, quiet at first, then building like a wave. So to every nurse in this room, be stubborn, be thorough, be brave, document everything, report problems, demand accountability. And when they try to silence you, because they will try, remember that you're part of something bigger than any single hospital or investigation or career. You're part of a profession that refuses to abandon patients. That's our strength. That's our power. That's how we change the world. One documented observation, one honest report, one courageous stand at a time. The standing ovation lasted 5 minutes. Morgan stood at the podium, tears streaming down her face, watching 10,000 nurses affirm the choice she'd made on an airport floor 5 years ago. After the conference, Morgan and Emma walked through Boston Common. Fall leaves crunched under their feet. The air was crisp and clean and full of possibility. "What happens now?" Emma asked. "You've reformed the system, inspired the profession, won every award. What's left?" Morgan thought about it. About the calls that still came, the investigations that still needed coordination, the nurses who still needed support. What's left is the work, every day, making sure the systems stay reformed, making sure the protections stay strong, making sure nobody has to fight alone the way I did. That sounds exhausting. It is, but it's also the most important thing I've ever done. Morgan pulled her daughter close. Besides raising you, Emma smiled. Smooth save. They walked in comfortable silence, mother and daughter, nurse and future doctor, two people who'd survived a fight that had tested every limit and emerged stronger. Morgan's phone buzzed. A text from General Locke. CNN just reported that hospital mortality rates are down 23% nationally since the reforms. Patient safety incidents down 31%. Nursing retention up 40%. You did that. Never forget, you changed everything. Morgan looked at the message, thought about all the patients who'd live because equipment wouldn't fail, all the nurses who'd speak up because the system would protect them, all the executives who'd think twice before putting profit over lives because consequences were real now. She thought about a briefcase hitting an airport floor, about a choice made in seconds that had rippled into years of transformation, and she realized something profound. She hadn't been looking for heroism that day. She'd just been a nurse who saw someone dying and couldn't walk away. Everything that came after, the investigations, the trials, the reforms, was just an extension of that same instinct. The refusal to let suffering continue when she had the power to stop it. Emma squeezed her hand. You okay, Mom? Yeah, I'm good. Really good. Ready to go home? Morgan looked at her daughter, brilliant, compassionate, carrying forward the legacy of advocacy without even realizing it yet. Looked at the city around them, at hospitals full of nurses who now had voices that mattered. Looked at a future where the fight wasn't finished, but the battlefield had shifted in favor of the people who cared most. Yeah, Morgan said. Let's go home. They walked together through autumn streets, and Morgan Hayes, the nurse who'd been dismissed as just another floor nurse who'd saved a general and exposed corruption and reformed American healthcare, felt something she hadn't felt in 5 years. Peace. Not the peace of battles won, but the peace of purpose fulfilled. Of knowing that when the impossible choice had arrived, she'd made the right decision. Of understanding that individual courage, multiplied across thousands of people, could transform systems that seemed immovable. The work would continue. New investigations, new whistleblowers, new fights against corruption that never fully died. But tonight, Morgan was just a mother walking home with her daughter, carrying the quiet satisfaction of someone who'd refused to be silent and watched the world change because of it. Behind them, the sun set over Boston. Ahead, lights came on in hospital windows across the city, places where nurses worked safer shifts, where patients received better care, where the systems Morgan had fought to reform protected people she'd never meet. And in that moment, Morgan understood the true measure of her victory. It wasn't the awards or the legislation or the verdicts. It was the nurses who would never know her name, reporting problems without fear because the infrastructure existed to protect them. It was the patients who'd never know how close the system had come to failing them, alive because equipment now met safety standards. It was the silence of whistleblowers who didn't have to blow whistles anymore, because the mechanisms caught corruption before it metastasized. Morgan had started as someone invisible, a floor nurse dismissed and underestimated and ignored. She'd ended as someone who proved that the invisible people, the nurses and techs and support staff doing unglamorous work at patient bedsides, were the ones with the power to change everything. All it took was refusing to look away. All it took was documentation and courage and the stubborn insistence that patients deserved better. All it took was one person making one choice in one moment and then making that same choice every day afterward until the world had no choice but to change. Emma looked up at her mother. What are you thinking about? Morgan smiled. Everything and nothing, mostly that I'm grateful. For what? For you, for the fight, for the fact that when it mattered most, I didn't get on that plane. They reached their apartment building, climbed the stairs, went inside to dinner and homework, and the beautiful ordinary rhythms of a life hard-won and deeply valued. And somewhere across the country, a nurse saw something wrong, remembered Morgan's story, and picked up the phone to report it, confident that this time someone would listen. The end.